Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Abdelrahman Al-Anani and I will be with you inshallah throughout this session. First of all, shout out to Fuad for collecting the slides. You can find this file in the Academic Hub. I think this session will be very, very, very important and very beneficial inshallah. Since physiology is the big bulk of the renal block, I think less people are suffering with anatomy, for example, compared to physiology and renal. So inshallah, this session will be helpful. Now you can find timestamps down in the description, so you can go straight to the lecture that you want to understand it. I will go throughout all the slides, all the lectures, and I will say what is important, what's not important, what you should know, explain what needs explanation, and yeah, inshallah it will be beneficial. You can put this on 2x, by the way. I know most of you are doing it already. Okay, so starting with this. By the way, this is not important. It's just, basic things that you will not be asking about. Okay, morphology of the kidney. You should not know these structures for physiology. You should, of course, know it for anatomy, but for us in physiology, it's not quite important. But here's what's important, what you should know from this slide. Here we have a renal artery. Okay? This renal artery is bringing blood to the kidney. The blood is being circulating in the kidney, and it has two outlets. So it came from the artery and it's going out through two outlets. What are these two outlets? The deoxygenated blood will leave throughout the renal vein. But other thing that might happen is that some of this blood will be filtered in the nephrons, in the kidney. And this filtered amount will leave through the renal pelvis and the ureter. So to sum it up, we can say that the blood that's coming from the artery, okay, let's just continue this. Okay, the blood that's coming from the artery is leaving as deoxygenated blood from the renal vein and as urine from the ureter. So we can interpret a law from this, and this law is this law. As you can see, this is the blood that's coming from the artery, and it's leaving through the vein and through the ureter. Does that make sense? But here there's something that you can you might ask yourself, why do we say renal plasma flow? I just was talking about blood, right? Why is it plasma? Why is it not blood? Okay, so when we are talking about urine, we are always saying plasma, not blood. Why? When the blood is being filtered in the glomerular capillary, cells of the blood are not leaving. So the only thing that's being filtered is plasma. Since blood is plasma and cells, the cells are not leaving through the glomerular capillary. Okay? Only plasma is being filtered. So we are only dealing with plasma for now. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Now, we estimate this should be like this, to not confuse. Okay? We estimate that the renal plasma flow of the artery and the renal plasma flow of the vein and the renal plasma flow, they are all almost the same. Why? Because if 600 milliliters of blood came with the artery, 599 are leaving with the vein, and only one of that is urine, 1 milliliter, because 99% of the filtered amount is reabsorbed. Okay, so what leaves with urine is only 1. Okay, so we can estimate the 600, 599. It doesn't really matter. So we just say renal plasma flow from now on. Now, amount of substance. Now, if we say that we have 100 milliliters of water, and 5% of that, 5% of that is salt. So we have a solute, 100 milliliters, 5% of it is salt. How much is the salt? You will just multiply the concentration times the volume of the whole solute, and you will get around 5 milliliters. This is exactly what's happening here. As we said, this equation is telling us that what comes from the artery is leaving through the vein and through urine. we can multiply the whole equation by the concentration of a substance, and that substance, let it for example be creatinine. You will just multiply the concentration of the substance in the artery and the substance in the vein and the substance in the urine, and you will get this equation. Nothing magical here, it's just you're getting amount of substance, so you multiply the volume with the concentration. Hope that makes sense. And this is just a rearrangement of the equation, this one, so no need to memorize it. Okay. Clearance is a very, very, very important concept, guys. This law you should not forget. You will get about 5 questions, 6 questions in the exam about the concept of clearance, so please do not forget it. What is clearance? You might be wondering. I will try to explain it to my best capability of my ability, let's say. So let's say that 100 milliliters of plasma is coming here through the afferent arteriole. It goes, and 20 of it is 20 milliliters is filtered, which is this yellow box. Okay, if this is 20 milliliter, then this should be 80. What's left from the 100, right? And that will be this amount. Okay, the red amount. Can you see it? Okay. Now, this 20 milliliter, as we said, 99% of what's being filtered is being reabsorbed. And when I say 99%, I of course mean what? Water. Because water is the big bulk of the plasma. Okay? So if 99% of water is reabsorbed, it will be around also 20 milliliter. This yellow box here, can you see it? It will be also 20 milliliter. This is the amount of plasma that had been reabsorbed again. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if this amount is reabsorbed, but for example, let's say we had some creatinine here. Okay? Creatinine has not been reabsorbed. Okay? So it's still here. But the plasma that got out, the water that had been reabsorbed, does not have creatinine. And how much is that amount? 20 milliliters. So when we say clearance of creatinine, how much is it? We will say in this case it's 20 milliliters. Why? Because clearance is the amount of plasma that's getting rid of a certain substance in the unit of time. So if like each minute this is happening, we will say that the clearance of creatinine is 20 milliliters per minute. Okay? Because 20 milliliters of plasma each minute has been cleared from creatinine. Okay? I hope that makes sense. So this is what clearance is, because you might get a question that's not asking to calculate the clearance, but rather which of the following could be a definition for clearance. Okay? So you should understand what is clearance. Now, this is just, the law again, some more talking. No need to know much about it here. Now, GFR. GFR is also a very important concept. What's GFR? GFR is short for glomerular filtration rate. So let's say that we have 100 milliliter that are being filtered here of plasma, and 20 of it is here again. So we have what? 20. Then in the peritubular capillary, something can happen, or one of two things: reabsorption and secretion. What do we mean by that? So a certain substance, okay, if we say that 20 milliliters of this substance is here in the tubular fluid right now, had been filtered. The peritubular capillary can secrete this substance. If it secretes it, and let's say it secretes 10 milliliters, then we will have what? 30 of this substance here. Does that make sense? And then 5 of it had been reabsorbed. So here's 5 milliliters. So what's left here is 25, right? This 25 milliliters is what we call the excreted amount, is what's coming out. So we can sum up a law from this, and this is the law that you should memorize. The amount that's being excreted, okay, this is the amount that's being excreted with urine of a certain substance, is equal to what's being filtered plus the secretion minus the reabsorption. You just did it without knowing the law. Here, we said if you secrete it, you will add it to the amount. And if you reabsorb it, you will what? Decrease it from the amount, or, you know. So this is what? The law that you should know. Now, let's say, for example, a certain substance is neither secreted and neither reabsorbed. It just filtered and straight away goes like this. And just straight away goes out. Then we will just cancel them from the law, and we can say what? That the amount of that's being excreted equals the amount that's being filtered. And if you notice, if we like just divide it like this and like this, okay, you will get the GFR. Okay, the amount that's being filtered per minute is what? Equal to the clearance of that substance. Why? This is the law of clearance that we just discussed. Do you remember, guys? I hope that makes sense. So what do you need to know from this slide? This law, sorry, because too much crap had it. This law, and that for a substance that's not secreted, not reabsorbed, GFR will equal clearance. Now, what's an example for this substance? Inulin. Inulin is neither secreted, neither reabsorbed, hence it's the GFR equals its clearance. Or its clearance equals GFR. So we can estimate GFR from what? Its clearance, if we can calculate it. Same with creatinine. Creatinine is little reabsorbed and little secreted. So for example, if we reabsorb 5 of the filtered creatinine, and then we secrete 5 milliliters, we will end up with what? It will balance each other, and we will only have the GFR, or the amount that's filtered. Okay? Now, they came up with something, and they found out that the excreted amount of creatinine is equal to a constant number. Okay? They didn't tell us what this constant is, but you just should know it. If the excreted amount is equal to the constant, and this constant is put here. Okay? Now, when you have an equation like this, I hope like you guys are following up with me. Okay. So when you have such an equation and you have a constant and 2 variables, okay? What are the 2 variables? This one and this one. If you just know one of each variables, you can tell the other, like right away. How is it that done? Look at the graph. This represents that constant, okay, that we were talking about. And here we have the plasma creatinine. If you just measure the plasma creatinine of someone and it's 1, you can just go to the graph and see 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, so the GFR of this person is about 120. If it was 5, you will go with 5 and you will just find that it's 25. So you just need to know that creatinine, the amount secreted, they made it equal to a constant, and they made this graph. You can estimate the GFR from the plasma creatinine concentration. So it's very easy to use. Unlike inulin. Why we don't use inulin? Because inulin is not made in the body. So if you want to measure the clearance of inulin, you will have to infuse the patient with it, and that's not fun. Okay. They can also do it with urea, because they also figured out something. You do not need to know this. Okay. Now, another examples of some clearance of different substances. Now we have para-aminohyporic acid. This substance is fully secreted, so some of it will be filtered. And then in the peritubular capillary, all of what's left will be secreted. Hence, the clearance of the pH is the whole renal plasma flow. Why? As we said, clearance of a substance is the amount of a substance that, the amount of plasma that's getting rid of a certain substance per minute, for example. So if all of the plasma getting rid of the pH, it will equal to the renal plasma flow, because all of the plasma got rid of para-aminohyporic acid. And under normal physiological conditions, of course, it will be 600, because, renal plasma flow is 600. Now, if we were to put that into a graph, we will have this filtration, which is the more pH you put, the more filtration will happen. and we have this secretion. Now, as you can see, secretion reaches a plateau. Let's just use red for this. Here, this is a plateau. Why? Because secretion has a limit. You cannot just secrete everything. There is a limit for secretion and a limit for reabsorption. So filtration will continue normally. But at a certain point, that secretion will stop. And you will have this. And if we were to look at the excretion, the excretion is equal to the filtration plus the secretion, right? So how much we filtered and how much we secreted into the tubular fluid. You will see that it's increasing rapidly, and then once you have this plateau, it will increase the same amount as the filtration, because only filtration is affecting it. Secretion is done. Hope that makes sense. Now, also for this splay, why do we have this splay? Why do we not, like when we reach the limit, why don't we do this? Like this. Why is there off? Okay, كده and كده. Why don't we do it this way? Well, that's because we don't have one nephron. If we were to do this graph for one nephron, you will have this. But kidney has 2 million nephrons, and each nephron has its own capacity. Okay, so when we do it to the whole kidney, you will see this display, because here some nephrons are getting tired. Here, more nephrons, more nephrons, more nephrons. Once you get here, that means all nephrons are done. Hope that makes sense. Now, clearance of glucose. Glucose is the exact opposite of pH. It's being fully reabsorbed. No glucose should appear in urine. So if it's getting fully reabsorbed, how much plasma has got rid of glucose? 0. And that means the clearance of glucose is 0. Okay. Now, if we were to do a graph for glucose, you will see that this is the filtration. Sorry, let's take another. Okay, let's take black. So this is the filtration, and it's going up like this. Okay, and as you saw in para-amino hyporic acid, the filtration is always, it doesn't like mind anything, and it just continues. So it doesn't stop at certain level. But the reabsorption, we said the reabsorption and secretion have limits. All of what's filtered is being reabsorbed until you reach here. Okay, and you will have the same thing that happened with the secretion in the para-amino hyporic acid. This play, because we have 2 million nephrons, and if you look at the excretion, okay, you will see that as long as the reabsorption is matching the filtration, you will have no excretion. You filtered 100, but you reabsorbed all of that 100. Nothing happened. But the excretion, once the filtration exceed the reabsorption, you will have what? Excretion. Okay. And this is just a summary slide. Now here, they came with an index that tells you whether a certain substance has been secreted or reabsorbed. Okay? What is this index? Okay. You divide the clearance of the substance with the GFR. Why? GFR is how much we filtered, right? So if this is more than GFR, okay, then that means it had been secreted. Why? If you filtered 100 and then you look in urine and you have 150, where did we get that 50? It had to be secreted somewhere, right? But if it's the opposite of, for example, this is 80 and this is 120, so we filtered 120, but then we look at the urine and you have 80. Why? That's because 40 has been reabsorbed. So that means that net reabsorption has happened. And we could use inulin instead of GFR. Why? Because as we said before, clearance of inulin is equal to GFR because it's neither secreted, neither reabsorbed. And yeah, that's it. If it's more than 1, which means that it's like the clearance is more than GFR, so it's secreted. If it's less than 1, then that means the clearance is less than GFR, so it's reabsorbed. That's a summary slide that says all of what we just did. Normal values, these you should know. But I think it will be some basics later, and no need to take a part of your day to memorize them. Okay. Now, this additional important relationships. Here, we had a question about this in the clinical scenario in TBL. I think a lot of people skip this slide, so there was some confusion. I'll tell you how to deal with this. So, what is urine? Urine is basically water and solutes, right? If you were to take urine, you will see that it's water plus solutes. And that brings us to this law. Urine is equal to the osmolarity, the clearance of osmolarity plus the clearance of water. What do we mean by that? Clearance of water, water. Now, what's the clearance of osmolarity? We said solutes, right? If we were to collect all solutes in one word, we will say osmolarity. So here it just says that urine is made of osmolarity and water. Now, if you were to calculate the water, only the water, what will you do? You will take that urine and take the solutes out. So this is exactly what's happening here. So if we had the amount of urine and the clearance of osmolarity, we will be able to calculate what? The clearance of water. And that's what the table question was asking about. Okay? How to calculate the clearance of osmolarity? Same law that we always use. V times U divided by P. And yeah, this was it for the first two lectures. Okay guys, so before we go to the second lecture, I want to share with you two concepts that I think I might have missed, and they are quite important, so you should know them. So first of all, on this slide, or let's start from this slide. So what you should know from this slide is that we have an early distal tubule and a late distal tubule, physiologically. What do I mean by that? When you study in histology or anatomy, you have only distal tubule. Yeah, proximal, distal, and that's it. But here we divide the distal tubule as early and late because they have physiological differences. What do I mean? I'll explain it here. Okay. So the permeability of water. This is a very important concept that we will revisit again, and I think it was like lecture number 5, I think. Anyways, so how is the nephron permeable to water? It actually differs from one part of the nephron to the other. So until here, so this is what? The proximal tubule, okay? And the thin descending limb of Henle lobe. Can you see this? All of this, let's just stick it out, is always permeable to water. So under normal physiological conditions, it should always be permeable to water. So we can reabsorb water in these guys, okay? Now, in the thin ascending limb of Henle lobe and the early distal tubule, you remember when I said it was early and late? So until the end of the early distal tubule, around here, we are impermeable to water. No water can be reabsorbed here under normal physiological conditions. Now, after the early distal tubule, we have the late distal tubule and the collecting duct. So all of this, let's just, take this out and do it like this. All of this is normally impermeable to water, but it gets permeable to water when we have the hormone we call ADH. And it's a very important hormone, which we will be talking about in P7 and P8, inshallah. So this is the first concept. Just memorize the different permeability of water along the nephron. Okay? Another concept that I have forgot to explain is here. So now you guys understand this part, I suppose. Okay? When you look at this equation, you will see that water, if let's say, if we have the flow is bigger than the osmolarity, we will have a positive water clearance, okay? Because this is more. So if this is 1, for example, this is 0, you will get positive 1. If they are equal, you will have what? 0. If this is 0, for example, and this is 1, you will have negative 1. So what can you say about that? Well, you can interpret that water clearance can actually be positive, negative, or 0. What can we understand from the water clearance, whether it was 0 or negative or positive? I will tell you. If we have positive water clearance, that means that we cleared water from the plasma. So the water had been kicked out of the plasma. And that makes the the osmolarity of the plasma higher. Do you remember, guys, in F&D when we were discussing ECF and ICF? So the normal plasma osmolarity is 290. Let's say it's 300 just for the sake of this explanation. So it's normally, let's say it's 300. If we have positive water clearance, so we kick the water out, the osmolarity increases. That means the solute concentration has increased. So for example, it becomes 400. What if we have zero water clearance? That means that we didn't clear the plasma and we didn't reabsorb water. So nothing has actually happened. It remains isotonic. Okay? I hope that makes sense. Now, what if we have negative water clearance? If you have negative water clearance, that means that instead of getting rid of water, you actually gained water. So that means that the plasma osmolarity, what will happen to it? It will be diluted. So it will be less, let's say, for example, 250. Does that make sense? Because a question might come and ask you, someone had a positive water clearance. What can you tell from that? And you should say, okay, positive water clearance, we kicked water out, so the plasma osmolarity is what? High, hyperosmolar plasma. And always know that the urine is opposite to the plasma. So if the plasma is hyperosmolar, that means that we have hypoosmolar urine, and vice versa. From this, you don't need to know much now. Just know that how are we filtering? The substances that are being filtered are coming with the glomerular capillary, and they are filtered through these filtration slits. What are filtration slits? It's these openings between the podocytes. Can you see it, guys? These guys. So substance is going like this and whoop, like this. Okay? Okay. Now, here. We are saying that certain substances are filtered and some are not. Why is that? Do you remember when I talked about the blood and its cells and plasma, and we're only filtering plasma, cells are not filtered? Why? Well, two main reasons that we take in consideration when we are going to talk if a substance is either filtered or not. First of all, the size of a substance, of course. If it's bigger than the filtration slit, what can we do then? Of course, it will not be filtered. Now, what are the sizes that we want to take in consideration? Please remember all of this, okay? If the substance is small, less than 18 angstroms, it's freely filtered, okay? If it's bigger than 42 angstrom, that means bigger than filtration slit, it's never filtered, not filtered, okay? Of course, under normal physiological conditions, as we always say. Now, if it's between 18 and 42, it's partially filtered. This is the first thing that we take in consideration. Second thing is the charge of the ion or the molecule. Why? I will explain to you here. Okay? So, as we said, the substance is going like this, and then it's trying to be filtered. Okay? Now, if a substance is between 18 and 42, we said it's partially filtered. What does that depend on? On the charge. Why? Here, this is an endothelial cell, okay? And this is a podocyte, and this is their basement membrane. All over this filtration opening here, the filtration slit, and the filtration slit here, and this basement membrane, we have negative charges. Why? Proteins. Proteins are mainly negative. So, when a positive ion is going like this, like moving, and this negative charge sees it, what does it do? It attracts it towards it, and that makes it easier to be filtered. Okay? Now, same concept, but let's see what happens with negative ions. If the negative is coming like this, and it sees it, what does negative and negative do? They repel each other. So it's saying no, it will not be filtered. And this is exactly what you can see here. Okay, and remember, we're talking about 18 and 42. Okay, in between. If we take 26, for example, as a size that we want to take as an example. So this, and this. Okay, If a substance is neutral, it will be filtered. Let's say half of it will be filtered at 26. Okay? Now, if it's anionic means negative. It will be filtered much less, about 0.1, let's say. And if it's, sorry, this is not quite 26, around here. Yeah, if it's here, it's what, about 0.9. Can you see the difference? Why? Because cationic are positive, so they are attracted by the filtration slits protein. I hope that makes sense. Now, some way to remember the cationic, is it positive, is it negative? I like to use this, which is cationic, so cat are positive, as in paw, the cat's paw. So it's positive. I know it's a silly way, but if it does the job, it does the job. If you remember it somewhere, somehow else, then yeah, feel free to enjoy your way, whatever. Okay, now here, nothing. Do not memorize the whole of this, of course, but just notice this, guys. When you, if the radius is like less than 18, for example, all of these guys, you will see what it's almost all one except for aniline, because it's approaching the 18. If it's bigger than 18, can you see how it decreases the filterability? It decreases so much. Okay? Yeah, this is just, why is it here? Now, same thing again, but we will take the substances that are less than 18. Why? Didn't we say it's freely filtered? Yes, it is, but as you can see here, some of these substances, like some other effects, can decrease its filtration or increase its filtration. And what's that? Also the charge. But it will work differently. Why? I will show you now. We said there are substances that are like less than 18. And let's see what will happen here. Now, as we said, we have negative charges all over the filtration slits. But these substances are very small. So they go and the plasma proteins do not notice them. It's like they are away from the plasma protein because they are small in size. But what actually affects them now, if it's not the filtration slits protein, it's the plasma proteins. Okay? Plasma proteins are also negative. But now think about it. These negative plasma proteins, if they see a positive ion, what will happen? They will attract it towards them. So away from the filtration slits, so less filtration. Okay? If they see a negative ion, such as chloride, what will they do? They will repel it towards what? Filtration slit. So now, if we are in between 18 and 42, positive is attracted by what? The filtration slits protein, so it's more filtered. Here, it's the opposite, because what? Plasma proteins are what are doing the effect. Is that a correct English sentence? I don't know. Okay. Yeah, that was it. As you can see here, okay, the concentration of sodium in the ultrafiltrate and divided by the plasma will give you, just put this away for now, will give you what? Less than 1, which means that the ultrafiltrate is less than the plasma. Why? Because it's positive and it's less than 18. So it's attracted by the plasma protein away from the filtration slits. And it's the opposite for chloride. You can see it here. And that number we call Dunham factor. Just know that it's 0.95 and it's the Dunham factor, but I doubt he will ask about it. This law, you should already know it from the previous lecture. These are all clinical things that we will not be asked about, inshallah. Also here, the load law, the load means the amount. So it's the same thing. If we want the amount, we will take what? The volume and times it by the concentration. So also nothing much. Okay. So for this, this is actually something that's based on something that we already talked in CVB. Just to remind you guys, we had in the capillary, we had some forces that are either driving the fluid or the blood to the filtration or the reabsorption. Okay, but here, since we are in the glomerular capillaries, we do not have reabsorption. It's only filtration. Okay, so how does the filtration stop? Okay, this is what I will be explaining now. Now, you know that in each compartment, so like here in the glomerular capillary, you have two forces. One that's hydrostatic, pushing the fluid to the filtration, and one that's colloid osmotic, that's produced by the proteins in that fluid, that's driving the forces towards the reabsorption, trying to reabsorb this fluid. Okay, so we have these guys in the blood, okay, these two, and we have also here, since here in the bone space we have urine that's being filtered, we'll have also a hydrostatic pressure, but we do not have this guy, sorry, yeah, we do not have colloid osmotic pressure of the Bowman space. Why? Well, because we have no proteins here. This is produced by proteins, and as we said, proteins are negative, so they are hard to filter, and they are also, the main reason is that they are so big. They are bigger than, like, they cannot be filtered. They are not ions, for example. Okay, so under normal physiological conditions, no pathology here, we do not have colloid osmotic pressure in the Bowman space. Okay. So what happens here? Well, hydrostatic pressure in the glomerular capillary and in the Bowman space are constant. Okay, so if it's 50, it remains 50. If it's 70, it remains 70. It does not decrease along the capillary. The same thing here. Let's say it's 10. Now, if this is going towards filtration as 50, and this guy is going towards the reabsorption to the capillary as 10, the net force here is driving 40, is like 40, and it's going towards what? Filtration. So it all comes up to this guy to play. Why? Because this is constant. When we need to, how does the filtration stop then? I will tell you. This guy changes, the colloid osmotic pressure. How? The colloid osmotic pressure is produced by the concentration of the proteins. It's not produced by the number of proteins. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you have 1 liter of blood and you have 10 proteins, if this 10 becomes 15, the concentration increased, right? So the colloid osmotic pressure also increases. Okay? But at the same time, if you just leave it, okay, at 10, and you say, okay, I now have 500 milliliters. With the same 10, the concentration increase and the colloid osmotic pressure is increasing. Now you can understand this. The thing is, at the start of the filtration, the colloid osmotic pressure is very low, okay, because the concentration is not much. So we are going towards filtration. But the more we filter, the more water is going out, and the higher the concentration of the proteins, until the moment that this guy equals the 40 that we need to reach the equilibrium. Once he reaches this 40, we are done. And this you can see here in the graph. This guy is constant, 10, and this guy is constant, 50. This guy is increasing alongside this line until it reaches the difference, which is 40. So 10 plus 40, it's 50. And now we reach the equilibrium and we end. No reabsorption here, we are not in the glomerular capillary. We are in the glomerular capillary. And this equation you already know from CVB. Just remind yourself of it. Okay? Now, as we said, increasing the renal plasma flow increases GFR. Why? Because it will take more filtration to reach the same concentration of proteins that we need. How? I will tell you. So, as we said, our beautiful example, 1 liter, 10 proteins. Okay? If we have 2 liters, it's 20 proteins. Now, this guy will filter, for example, let's say 500 milliliters. So what's left is 500. And we have the same 10 proteins. So the concentration increased, and now we stopped. If this guy were to do the same thing, who has higher renal plasma flow, it will need to reach 1 liter this time. with its 20 proteins. Do you see the difference? This guy filtered 1 liter to reach the same concentration that this guy reached by filtering 500 milliliters. Why? Because the original amount, the renal plasma flow, is different between them. And this you can see. If you do not understand this concept, you can just convince yourself, okay, if we double the renal plasma flow, we will double the GFR, and that's it. Okay? This you do not need to know, because this is not the real model that... this is only a model. This is not what's happening in our body. This is what's happening. Now, think with me, guys. Let's assume that we have... okay, this is our afferent arteriole, capillary, and efferent arteriole. Okay, let's label them. Okay, and our capillary. Okay. If you constrict this guy only, what happens to the plasma flow, the renal plasma flow? Of course, it decreases, right? So what we will say here is that the renal plasma flow decreased. Constriction, more resistance, it cannot go to the capillary. So the renal plasma flow through the capillary has decreased. Okay? What happens to the pressure in the glomerular capillary? Well, just something to note, and you should keep it in your mind always. When you increase the resistance downstream of the capillary, so behind the capillary, okay, the pressure drops. When you increase it upstream after the capillary, the pressure increases. Okay? Now, we constricted downstream, so we will have what? This pressure. Both of these guys decrease filtration, right? If you have decrease of this and decrease of this, you will have less what? Filtration. Our filtration is referred to as GFR. Now look at the graph. You will see it's the same thing. You constricted the afferent arteriole, so the renal plasma flow decreases. Pressure in the glomerular capillary decreases. GFR decreases. Very easy. Now, what if we do it to the efferent arteriole? Let's get back to this guy. So now, all of this is gone. Please. Okay. And now we constrict the efferent arteriole. First of all, renal plasma flow. What happens? It decreases. Why? The blood will be it will back up and back up and back up and back up and back up, like it will, because the resistance is here, and it will decrease the whole renal plasma flow. Okay, so it will be renal plasma flow will also decrease. But look at the pressure. We said if you constrict or increase the resistance upstream, you increase the pressure. So you will have what? Increased pressure. Now you see it's contradictory. If you were to ask about the GFR, this one decreased, but this one increased. So what will happen? Well, the answer is it depends. Okay, look at the graph. The renal plasma flow is decreasing, right? And the capillary pressure is increasing. What happens to the GFR? At the first constriction, when the constriction is not very powerful, the pressure, the change in pressure dominates. What do we mean by that? The change in pressure is very high that it actually dominates over the renal plasma flow. So we do not care that this decreased, the GFR will increase. But at some point, the change in renal plasma flow is so big that, okay, no matter how much the pressure, we are not receiving any blood at all. Okay, so the renal plasma flow dominates, and now we have what? A decrease in GFR. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So what you should memorize is that we are following in the efferent arteriole, we are following whoever is stronger, okay? So if the glomerular capillary pressure change is very high, we will follow it. If it's the renal plasma flow that's being dominated, we will follow it. Hope that makes sense. And this is just a summary slide. As you can see, we have this equation. You know all of this. What's new here is this factor. No need to know anything about it. If it comes in the exam, he will give you the factor and you just calculate the thing and you get the GFR. Now, what are the factors that we can see here that can manipulate GFR? the hydrostatic pressure of the capillary. Of course, if it increases, the GFR increases. If it decreases, the GFR decreases. Very easy. When does it increase? This is very important to know. And that it, as we said in the afferent and efferent arteriole, it increases when we constrict the efferent arteriole. Okay? So constriction of the efferent arteriole will increase the GFR. And when does it decrease? Okay, when it decreases, this also decreases. When does that happen? When you constrict the afferent arteriole. Okay? Okay. Pressure in the Bowman space. If it increases, okay, now let's go back to this. Okay, it will go like this. So it's decreasing the GFR. When does this pressure increase? When you have a pathology. Normally it's, as we said, constant. And that pathology is like a very important example is kidney stones. Because urine will backflow and it will increase until the pressure increases there in the Bowman space. Now, also colloidosmotic pressure. Colloidosmotic pressure, if it increases, it will take the fluid back, let's say, reabsorb the fluid, and that will decrease GFR, and vice versa for this. When do we have a decrease or an increase in the colloidosmotic pressure? You have an increase when you are dehydrated. Why? You have less water. The same proteins. You remember what we said, when you have less water and the same proteins, concentration increases. And vice versa, when you are hungry, you have less proteins in your blood, and that's it. Here also we said we don't have normally proteins in the Bowman space, but if you have, it will increase the GFR. Why? Because it will, if you go back here, okay, and it's sucking this towards it, okay? Now you increase the GFR. If you have it, and normally you don't, but in some pathologies you do. And yeah, this is pretty much everything that you can see here. All of this I just said. Of course, this factor, if it increases the GFR, but we don't know when or why or how. Like nothing about it is explained, so I guess it's not important. You just know that you multiply it by the starting forces after you calculate it, if you were to be asked about it. Now, something here that you should appreciate is that the afferent arteriole is the major place where we have a drop in pressure. So if we had a pressure in 100 here in the renal artery, and you look at the glomerular capillary, it's about 60. How? This drop in pressure in the vas afferens, which is the afferent arteriole. Now you take that 100 and you make it 200. And you look at the glomerular capillary pressure and it's still 60. Why? Because this is regulated by vas afferens. How? This is what we will explain now. Same thing. When you increase the pressure, we can maintain by auto-regulation the same capillary pressure. So the glomerular filtration rate does not change, neither is the renal plasma flow. How? As we said, by the afferent arteriole. And we have two mechanisms for that. First of all, myogen mechanism. The myogen mechanism, we know it from CVB, if you guys remember. And it's saying that when you have high pressure, you have a stretch of the vessel, okay, let's reconstruct this sentence. Okay. Now, afferent arteriole is an arteriole and it has smooth muscle. Okay? Smooth muscles are sensitive to stretch. When you stretch it, calcium enters the cell and it causes vasoconstriction. Okay? We should all know that. Now, if you have high pressure, high stretch, high calcium going onto the cell, vasoconstriction. If you have vasoconstriction of the afferent arteriole, do you guys remember what happens? When you constrict downstream, both renal plasma flow and also the glomerular capillary pressure will decrease. So you will have a decrease in GFR. This is the other mechanism, which is quite new, okay? Now, focus with me, guys. Here we have a place that we call macula densa, which is basically some cells. These cells detect the high sodium in the tubular fluid. Why will we have high sodium in the tubular fluid? if you have high pressure, you will have high GFR, right? You should have high GFR. And high GFR means more things are being filtered, including sodium. Now, look at this. This sodium is going into the macula densa cell. So we have here high sodium inside the cell, right? What does that lead to? Sodium is leaving the cell through the ATP pump, sodium potassium ATP pump. Okay? If you have high sodium, this pump needs to work more to kick the sodium out, right? So what will that lead to? Increased amount of ATP because you want to make the pump work more, and increased amount of adenosine. What's adenosine? It's basically the lift out of adenosine. It's as if you ate a chocolate and adenosine is the paper that, the chocolate was in. So that's basically it. So both will be increased. When you increase both, okay, the smooth muscle cells of the afferent arteriole will respond to that increase because they have certain receptors. It will take these adenosine and ATP and it will know, okay, there is something wrong. And it causes the calcium gates in the smooth muscle cells to let calcium in, which leads to what? Vasoconstriction. You see? This is the tubular glomerular feedback. What other thing happens is this. It's not part of the tubular glomerular feedback itself because it's a global thing, and you will see how it works. When you have high calcium here, we said vasoconstriction happened. And now and that calcium will go through these gap junctions and enter the neighboring cell. This neighboring cell is not a normal smooth muscle. You can see it has granules. We call it a granular cell or juxtaglomerular cell. Okay, this is a name for histology. This increase in calcium inside the granular cell leads to decrease in renin release. What's renin? Good question. Look here, guys. So renin basically works when you have low sodium. Do you remember when we had more sodium in the tubular glomerular feedback here? That led to what? Low renin. So if you have less sodium, you have more renin. And vice versa. So they are like contradictory to each other. Now what happens here? If you have low sodium or low GFR, renin is released. What does renin do usually? It produces angiotensin. And angiotensin produces aldosterone. It's a cascade. What you need to know from this is that it does also vasoconstriction. Now you will ask yourself, okay, so it does vasoconstriction. If it's not released, as in here, if it's not released, you will have vasodilation. Don't we want the vasoconstriction to happen? Why is that? I will tell you. Renin does not work on the afferent arteriole, neither the efferent arteriole. It works on the whole body. So when you have vasodilation of the whole body, because no renin is being released, the whole pressure of blood in the whole body is dropped. So you have decreased pressure in the whole body, and this vasoconstriction of the afferent arteriole maintains the pressure in the glomerular capillary constant. Okay, that was a lot of things, but please, I hope you understand this. Okay? From this slide, you guys already know this. This you should remember also. You might be asking about it, but I doubt it. You just remember the efferent and afferent arteriole, what they do. Humeral, you need to know the renin especially. And as I said, this is how it works. Okay, now 5th and 6th lecture. Okay, guys. So now we start with the 5th and 6th lecture. From this slide, I need you to know two things. That we can reabsorb substances through how do we reabsorb in the nephron? Two ways. Either transcellularly through the cell or paracellularly between two cells. You take it between from the tight junctions. Okay? Now, how to deal with that? This is not very important, but the next is, but please focus with me in this part. I want you always to ask yourself when you think of a certain part of the nephron on what happens or how we are reabsorbing, to ask yourself three main questions. 1. What's happening transcellularly? 2. What's happening paracellularly? Okay, whatever, you know what I mean. And 3. is there water reabsorption. And this water reabsorption will like tell us a lot of things. And I'll tell you how to answer these questions now. Now, let's start with the first half of proximal tubule. Now, some notes to know before we start, okay? Sodium is always reabsorbed throughout the whole nephron, okay? Chloride, it's easy to remember because sodium and chloride are salt, basically, so you are saying salt. Chloride is also the same, except first half of proximal tubule, okay? We have an Na, this is the third note, NaH plus antiporter all over the nephron except for the last part, which is the late distal tubule and the collecting duct. If you have these three things in mind, and you know these guys, you know how to ask yourself these three questions, I promise you will, inshallah, like understand all of the rest and you can remember it easy. Okay, so here, what's happening? First question you want to ask yourself, what's happening transcellularly? You will see that you have two transporters, okay? And as we said, we always have a sodium H plus bump, or sorry, antiporter, except for the last part of the nephron. So it's there, okay? And what else should you know is that we have a symporter here only in the first half of proximal tubule. So what I'm trying to do here, guys, I want to give you some rules that you will follow. And inshallah, in each part of the nephron, I will tell you what's special about this exact part. Here in the first half of proximal tubule, the special part is this symporter, which basically gets sodium inside with a negative, something negative that we want to call X. This X could be glucose, amino acids, lactate, and phosphate. Either one of these. Okay? Okay. Now, also, this is the first question. Second question. What's happening paracellularly? Here, nothing. Or actually, there's quite something that I will discuss with you guys. What about H2O? Is how to answer the question. The third question is, do we have a H2O reabsorption? Well, it's actually very simple. Do you remember, guys, in the first and second lecture where we said that in the proximal tubule and the thin descending limb of Henle lobe that these guys are always permeable to water, and then it's impermeable, and then it's permeable under ADH control? Well, this is what we are doing here. So where are we? Proximal tubule. Do we have water reabsorption? Of course we do. So water will also follow the ions. Makes sense? Makes sense. Now you can also see here, I think it will be mentioned in, here, HCO3 reabsorption, which is bicarbonate. So now bicarbonate is going into the tubular fluid, okay? This is throughout the kidney, it's not like special for some place. It will react with H plus to give us CO2 and water. Water will be reabsorbed normally, as you know, and CO2 is permeable to the cell. It goes into the cell, and then it reacts with water, gives us H plus and HCO3. H plus goes to the NaH pump that we have all over the cell, and bicarbonate is then goes out, like sometimes it's a channel, sometimes it's a transporter, but do not like focus on that. Now, second half of proximal tubule, we will ask the same three questions. What's happening transcellularly? Well, as we said, we always have what? A sodium reabsorption, and we have a sodium H plus antiporter. Okay? Okay. The second thing that you should remember, we said that we have chloride reabsorption everywhere, except for the first half of proximal tubule. Did you see chloride? I didn't. So, you will see here that we have a transporter for chloride. This transporter is working with any anion, any negative ion, okay? And it's also an antiporter. How does this transporter work? Well, please focus with me. We have here an anion. Okay, it's hard to say, guys. Do not judge, please. Now, we are getting H plus and an anion. we get the chloride in to the cell and the sodium into the cell. And now H plus and the anion are out of the cell. Can you see that? Outside of the cell, they react with each other. They give us H anion, and H anion is what? Is it positive? Is it negative? No, it's neutral. So it's permeable to the membrane. So it goes again inside the membrane. And then it gives us H plus, an anion. And it does it the same. Then it gives us H anion, goes inside the cell. And it does it again and again and again and again. And it's like, as Dr. Shams likes to say, a shuttle bus. It's just a bus that's like getting chloride and sodium inside the cell, but the driver himself is not doing anything, you know? He's just going here and there, here and there. Yeah, this is it. This first question. Second question. What's happening paracellularly? Well, you guys remember that we didn't reabsorb chloride in the first half. So now that we get to the second half, we have high chloride here. A lot of chloride ions. This high concentration makes it go paracellularly. It's rushing paracellularly. And that causes the lumen here to be positive. This positive lumen is pushing sodium towards reabsorption together with the chloride. So paracellularly, we also have reabsorption of salt in the second half of proximal tubule. What about water? Proximal tubule, guys. Of course we have water reabsorption. This is not how the chloride and potassium are going the other way. Not really important for us, okay? Now, we always say that water reabsorption is happening in the proximal tubule. Okay, but does water go like by itself? No, we actually have something that we call solvent drag, okay? This solvent drag is basically water pulling things with it as it goes paracellularly. So it's going like this, and it like sees a magnesium ion and takes it with it, a potassium ion and takes it with it. These guys are what you should remember, and that's all over the proximal tubule, by the way. So here, when we have a water reabsorption, we had the same thing here, and here when we had a water reabsorption, the first half, we also had the same thing happening. It's just mentioned in its own slide. Also, something to note here is that proteins, when a protein approaches the cell here, the cell membrane, it will be broken down by enzymes on the cell membrane, and the amino acids that are forming the peptides will be reabsorbed through endocytosis. Okay, here you do not need to memorize these guys, do not worry. It's just about that you should know something here. And that's, okay, we have some organic anions and some organic cations. All of these together, the anions, are competing for the same transporter. So now think with me, if we have 2 transporters available, and we have 5 people fighting over it, it will be so hard, right? And like 2 people will go, 3 will be left. So what do I mean by that is, or what is the purpose of this? It's just so that you know that some drugs are contradictory. Why? When you give them together, they use the same transporter. Can you see? These drugs, for example, or these drugs, the cationic drugs, also use the same transporter. And that leads to what? The drugs are fighting over the transporters to see who will be secreted. So some drugs will be left in the body for too much, and that could be dangerous for the patient. Okay? But you do not need to know which is cationic and which is anionic. Okay. Now, at the end of the proximal tubule, this is what we have. Okay, this graph. What do we mean by this graph? Okay. If a substance has been reabsorbed more than water, then its concentration in the tubular fluid is low. And this is an example of all of these substances. They have been reabsorbed more than water. Okay guys, I said it too much. I forgot how to say it. Okay, if it was reabsorbed less than water, then we have a lot of it still in what? In the tubular fluid. And these guys are example for it. Creatinine, urea, and chloride. If it was reabsorbed the same amount as the water, the same concentration, such as sodium, for example, then it will be equal to 1. And this is what you need to know from this graph. Here, Please remember the percentages. He might ask you about it. As we said, sodium and water, the same. This guy has been reabsorbed more than water. Hence, in the graph, it's less than 1 because the tubular fluid concentration is low. This guy, it's the opposite. So you will see it was more than 1 here, the chloride. And yeah, you should just know these guys. I think that graph actually sums it up. And if you understand it, inshallah, everything is good. Okay, now thin lobe of Hilli. What's happening here? Well, as we said, until here, if you remember, guys, from the first and second lecture, we are only permeable to water without salt. In the thin lobe of Hilli, it's without salt. So what do we have here? 15% of water will be reabsorbed in this thin lobe, in this descending thin lobe of Hilli. But the ascending, we are impermeable to water, but we are permeable to salt. So 25 of the salt will be reabsorbed. What does that lead to? Now think with me. If you have 15% of water reabsorbed here, but then 25, which has been of salt, has been reabsorbed here. So what I mean is that we absorbed more salts than water, right? And then the fluid that's reaching here is hypertonic, hypotonic, or isotonic. It will be hypotonic. Why? Because we got rid of salt, but we maintained water. So it will be hypotonic. Hope that makes sense. Now, what's happening? Again, same 3 questions. What's happening in the transcellularly? Here it's quite a lot of things. Let's start with this transporter. This transporter is actually it's so fun to deal with. Also, by the way, if you notice, we have seen this transporter somewhere else. The macula densa, because macula densa is around this thick ascending limb of a loop. Now we have this transporter. This transporter is being run by the Na and chloride and potassium. Na and chloride are a lot in the urine, right? But potassium is so low. The concentration of potassium is inside the cell, usually. So, okay, we have this beautiful transporter, but it doesn't work as much. Why? Because once you reabsorb, let's say, until this 4 millimoles of potassium end, then it will not work. And this is why, subhanallah, we have here a potassium channel. Why? To allow potassium to go out and participate in this. Okay? Okay. And as always, as I said before, we have this all over the nephron, except for the late distal tubule and collecting duct. Okay? And as I said, sodium and chloride are always being reabsorbed. Here, as we always say, basolateral membrane, we do not care a lot about it. Now, as we said here, we have what? Impermeability to water. Before we go that, let's ask ourselves, what's happening paracellularly? This is the second question, if you guys remember. Well, let's look here. We have an ion channel for potassium, right? Allowing potassium to go outside. Potassium is positive, so that will make this what? Positive. If it's positive, it will repel positive ions and it will go this way, paracellularly. What about water? No water reabsorption is happening here. Calcium reabsorption, you literally just need to know that we are reabsorbing calcium in proximal tubule, I think it's in the limbo of Hilli, like every other thing. I don't know why it has its own slide here. This is actually the most beautiful one. I adore this one, the early distal tubule, because it's look at the simplicity, bro. It's only sodium and chloride symporter. We are taking salt directly, and yeah, that's it. Do we have permeability for water in early distal tubule? No, we don't. Paracellularly, nothing is happening. Now, late distal tubule and collecting duct. Okay, now let's start. Here we have an ion channel for sodium. So sodium is going into the cell transcellularly. Okay? Okay. Now, we have also, sorry, let's rearrange this. So we have an ion channel allowing sodium to go in. channels are better than transporters. They allow so much to go in. So when you have a lot of sodium here, what will work more, guys? How did we actually transport sodium to the other way, aslan? By this. So this will work more. If it works more, we'll have potassium, a lot of potassium. But that's also, we don't want that. What will we do? We will have a potassium channel here, allowing for potassium to go out of the cell. Okay, so we have a sodium channel that's bringing sodium into the cell, and potassium channel that's going out of the cell. What's happening paracellularly? Well, it's negative here. Why is it negative? Well, because at the start we got sodium into the cell, and sodium is quantitatively more than potassium, so it's going into the cell more than potassium is going out. So more positive is going into the cell, so this will be more negative. This negative charge repels chloride to go through what? Paracellularly. So now we answered our beautiful 2 questions. Just last thing to note here is this. As I said, we do not have here an Na, like sodium hydrogen antiporter. This potassium that's going out of the cell, okay, it will be too much. Like if we will secrete too much potassium. If we do not want to lose potassium, what do? We use this pump. Okay, so H plus is going out and exchange of potassium going in. And also we have here a transporter that uses ATP to pump H plus. It's just a pump to pump H plus outside. In case we have, let's say, acidosis and we want to get rid of acid, we can use this transport. So aldosterone, what does aldosterone do? Aldosterone is a hormone that's like it's a steroid hormone, so it can dissolve into the cell membrane. So it will pass the cell membrane and it will go to its receptor inside the cell. Now aldosterone does 4 main things. First of all, it produces more Na channels to put into the membrane. Okay, and second thing is that the existing Na channels, such as this one, for example, so it was 1. Let's say that this was the original one, and now we have more. But also the existing ones, we have more permeability for these channels, so they also reabsorb sodium more and more. Now, if we have Na here, okay, we have a lot of sodium inside the cell because of these channels, we will have a problem. We want to get rid of it. So aldosterone also at the same time tells the mitochondria to produce more ATP to make this pump work more. It will also add more pumps. So more pumps and more ATP to work these pumps. Okay, this is basically what it does. Now, as a side effect, if you increase these pumps, you will have more potassium inside the cell. Hence, the potassium will be leaving more through these channels. So you are getting rid of more potassium. So as a side effect, you might get hypokalemia. Okay, hope that makes sense. By the way, this is all happening in the late distal tubule and collecting duct because they are the place where we always play with hormones. Now, this is a graph that tells you that more aldosterone, more Na channels. Very simple graph. Plasma K increases aldosterone concentration. Why? Because if you have a lot of potassium, we said as a side effect of aldosterone, what happens with potassium? It's excreted more. Do you remember, guys? More K is going into the cell. So more K here. So more K going outside of the channel. So what happens is that we are excreting K. So when we have an increase in plasma K and plasma potassium concentration, more aldosterone will be produced to get rid of potassium. So as a summary, you can just say that aldosterone reabsorbs sodium and excretes potassium. Hope that helps. Yeah. Okay. Okay, it's hard to read, but you can read it yourself. But what do we need to know here? Well, we have cortisol. Okay. Cortisol and aldosterone. I'll call it aldo for short. Okay. Aldosterone is less in quantity. So let's say we have 2 aldosterones. And cortisol is high in is more in quantity. So let's say we have 10 cortisols. Now we have some receptors that the aldosterone, if you remember here, this receptor, and also another receptor that aldosterone looks into or binds with, yani, and it produces the effect. Okay, now let's say that we have 10 receptors and we have 2 aldosterones and 10 cortisols. You would think, okay, they will compete for, by the way, both of these guys, cortisol and aldosterone, can bind with these receptors. So normally you should think, okay, they will compete with it until they fill all of these 10. But that's not what's happening. Why? We have an enzyme inside the cell that's burning this cortisol once it goes into it. It tells it, okay, stop. I don't want you to bind with aldosterone's receptors. So if this cannot bind, who will bind? These 2 aldosterone will bind with these 10 receptors and give us what? 2 receptors that are binded and 8 that are empty. So the effect will be mild. Okay. Now, what if we do not have this enzyme that burns the cortisol and metabolize it? What will happen? Well, okay, now these 10 cortisols can go and bind with the receptors. So all of these 10 receptors will be binded. And that will lead to what? A huge effect of like, it's an effect of the aldosterone, but the cortisol can do it as well. So we'll have this big effect. And that's what we call mineralocorticoid excess syndrome. As you can see here, aldosterone is binding because cortisol is being burned by this enzyme. Please remember it, 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. Just remember it as 11-BHSD. So that's normally. If we have this problem, this enzyme is inhibited, cortisol will bind instead of what? Aldosterone. And it will cause the problem. Now, what inhibits it? One of these inhibitors is licorice. If you guys know licorice, it's بالعربي عرق سوس. Okay. طيب. This is also like a syndrome that you need to know, which is hyperaldosteronism. It's basically same thing as this, but instead of cortisol doing the job, it's actually, we just have actually like a lot of aldosterone. So instead of these 2, we have actually 10. This is being burned and all, but aldosterone is also high. And what does these 2 guys lead to? The hyperaldosteronism and the mineralocorticoid syndrome. Okay, I said it actually. What do? They do these effects. Sodium retention, because we are reabsorbing sodium. That leads to hypertension and hypervolemia and edema. This leads to the other guys. Why? If you have sodium, water follows sodium, you have high blood volume, leading to hypertension and edema. Now, hypokalemia, because as if you remember guys, aldosterone gets rid of potassium. So we'll have muscle weakness and constipation and changes in ECG. Alkalosis. Why alkalosis? Because, let's go up here. Yeah. Okay, here. If you have aldosterone is getting rid of potassium. Do you remember, guys? So more potassium is being put here, right? All of this. If this potassium is a lot, this pump will work more to get the potassium in again, okay? Hence, more H plus is being secreted. If you have a lot of H plus being secreted, then you will have what? Alkalosis. Because we are secreting H plus into the tubular fluid. We are getting rid of it. Okay. Urine excretion. We have 2 main things that increase this excretion of potassium. And it's aldosterone, as we discussed. And extracellular potassium concentration itself also increases it. Just know this. Nothing to actually explain. As we said, K excretion will be increased by plasma K concentration and aldosterone. Now, you might ask yourself this. Tubular fluid, sodium. Why does it increase plasma K excretion? And I will tell you, I'm actually not sure. But when I looked into it, because I think Dr. Shams did not explain it much. But what I understood is that, okay, you have high NA going like NA here. So more Na inside the cell. Let's just clean this up, okay, a little bit, so it's easier to understand. Sorry guys. Okay, you will have high sodium here. So high sodium here. So this pump will work more. So more potassium here. Hence more potassium going out. It's that simple, yani. But I'm not sure if Dr. Shams explained it in the lecture. I don't know if it's important, but just know it, yeah. Okay. Now potassium transport across an F1. If you have a low potassium intake, it will be what reabsorbed here, يعني شوية هنا. Okay, not شوية. So some of it will be reabsorbed here, some here, some here, some here, some here. But if you want to excrete potassium, you will see that, okay, we will reabsorb here, but where do we do the fine regulation? Always late distal tubule and collecting duct. So when you reach the late distal tubule and collecting duct, you can secrete potassium again if you want to get rid of it because of high intake of potassium. Now, these are some causes that causes hypokalemia and hyperkalemia. I doubt that the doctor will ask about it, but just please know them, yani, for your own sake. I will say this is important quite a bit. This, not what's under them, yani, no need for that. And this, yeah, and the opposite in the other side. Okay, now hormones regulating calcium balance. The doctor said it's not very important, but just know this slide, okay? The others are not important. So just remember that all of the hormones are increasing calcium reabsorption, except for calcitonin. It's doing the opposite. This is the same thing. Okay, guys, so now we start with the 7th and 8th lecture. From this slide, you don't need to know much. You just want to know that, okay, we cannot excrete urine that's not concentrated. Why? Because if you want to excrete urine that's concentrated and get rid of the osmolarity that you, like the solutes that you want to get rid of, you will need to urinate about 4 liters of water. And that's too much. Imagine 4 liters of water daily, yani. Allah musta'an. So what can we do about that is concentrating urine. Okay, how? We will do these two things. Have a hypertonic interstitium and a current multiplier. What do I mean by that? Let's start by this. So we have our starting point. And by the way, if you didn't notice, this is the thin descending limb of Hilli lobe. And this is the thin ascending limb of Hilli lobe. And this is the interstitium. So this is the lowest part of the nephron. Okay? Okay. So what happens here? They are all isotonic as a start. Then we have pumps here. If you remember, guys, we had some pumps here that pump salt, but not water, because the thin ascending limb of Hilli lobe is not permeable to water. So what's this pump doing? Let's assume that we are doing a 2 milliosmol gradient. What do I mean by that? This pump wants to make this and this have 200 difference milliosmol between them. Okay, so how will it do this? By bumping the salt until it reaches this 200 and 400. We were 300, 300, bumped 100 outside, and we reached this. Okay. Now here in the thin descending limb of Hilli lobe, we are permeable to water but not salt. So what will it do? It will push water out, right? Until it reaches the equilibrium. Okay? I hope that makes sense. So you would say, okay, we are pushing water out, but why isn't the interstitium getting diluted? Well, it's because we have vasa recta outside. These blood vessels are reabsorbing the water that we pushed outside. Okay? So we will stop at this. And then some new urine is coming from here with its 300 milliosmol, okay, concentration. And that will lead to this. This 300 will push the 400 down, and this 400 will push the 400, and 400 push 400. And 400 comes in place of the 200, and you reach this stage. Now you start a second cycle, okay? The second cycle, how? Start the same thing. you want to build this 200 milliosmol difference. And you will see you reached here, here, and here, and here. And then you pump water. And then new urine comes. Until you reach this. After third, fourth, fifth, sixth cycle, you reach this. Okay? Here, what you need to know from this is we have built an interstitium and a tubular fluid that's its osmolarity is increasing from up to down. Okay, so here it was 100, 500, 800, 1000, 300, 700. So we are increasing the osmolarity when we are going down. Why? I will show you now. Let's take this model as an example. All of this time in the model, and the model in the previous slide, we were playing here, right? With the descending thin limb of heli lobe and ascending thin limb and all of that. Okay, so we have already built this hyperosmolar interstitium. What happens now? Now, as the urine is coming up, okay, the urine is coming up and up and up. You notice that its osmolarity is decreasing. Why? Because as we said, it's pumping salt outside until it reaches here. Here is where we have the late distal tubule and the collecting duct. Are they permeable to water? Yes, under the control of ADH. Only under control of ADH. So we have no two possibilities now. Okay? Once this reaches, this 100 reaches here, it will see that this interstitium is 300. Okay, so it will pump water in the presence of ADH until it reaches the equilibrium. And then it goes down, 300, 300, and 300. Okay, this 300 reaches here and it finds the interstitium is 500. So it pumps water by the presence of ADH until it is 500. This 500 goes and it finds that it's 700 here. So it pumps until it is 700. 900, 900, 1100. 1100. So you see, by two things, having this hyperosmolar interstitium and having ADH, we were able to concentrate urine. I hope that makes sense. The other possibility is that we do not have ADH. In this case, we are impermeable to water. So yes, this 100 sees that it's 300 here, but cannot do anything. How will it get rid of this water that it has? It comes here and now it became 90. Why? Because we have reabsorbed salt, but the water is still there. It becomes 80, 70. It sees the interstitium, but it cannot do much. It's impermeable. And then we have what? A hypotonic urine. Now, this is one part of the story. The other part is urea. Urea is being reabsorbed 50% in the proximal tubule and 70% in the collecting duct, but 60% secretion into the thin descending limb of heli lobe. You can see that, okay, we reabsorb here 70, but then we go and we secrete what? 60. What does that lead to? We have 10% of urea staying here in the interstitium, leading to a hyperosmolar interstitium. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, something to note here, I saw a question in the doctor file, Dr. Shams's quiz, and another question in the TBL. They were very similar, but their answer differed. How? One question was asking, from this, please tell me which of the nephron parts are the most permeable to urea. You will say, okay, this one, because most reabsorption is happening there. And you will be correct. Now, second question was asking, which is in Dr. Sham's file, which of the following is reabsorbing most of the filtered urea? Filtered, okay? And now it's not the collecting duct, it's actually the proximal tubule. Why? Because filtered urea, 50% of it is here. What's reaching here is 50% of that filtered, the 50% that's left from the filtered urea, and what's secreted. So urea in general, yes, reabsorption here is more in the cortical duct. When it says filtered urea, you should know that it means only the filtered amount, and that will be the proximal tubule. Just, side note that you should keep in mind if he asks about it. These you do not need to know. As we said, we have high permeability for urea down and low permeability in the top. You just, I think, this one sums it up, wallah. Okay? Okay. Here, osmolality of tubular fluid. What does ADH do? So, let's look at this line. Can you see it? This is when you do not have ADH. What will happen? Okay, so now we are in the descending limb of Hilli loop. The osmolarity is increasing. Why? Because we're pumping water out, but we do not pump salt. And then the ascending limb of Hilli loop, and let's with the blue. So this was the descending limb of Hilli loop, and the osmolarity is increasing. Now the ascending limb of Hilli loop, and the osmolarity is decreasing because we are pumping salt, but we are maintaining the water. And it actually decreases less than before, than the normal, the 300. Why? Because if you remember, it was 25% salt pumped, while 15% water reabsorbed here. So it leads to hypotonic urine. And then it continues, early distal tubule, late distal tubule. We do not have ADH, by the way, so the osmolarity is decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. Now, if we have ADH, you see, it will increase, and then when it comes here, it starts increasing again at the late distal tubule until it reaches this. Why? Because we have ADH, so we were able to reabsorb water. Now, you might ask yourself, okay, why then do we have an increase in this part? Well, because ADH does not only apply to late distal tubule and collecting duct, it actually also affects the thin descending limb of Hilli loop, but we do not talk much about it because it's a slight difference. But this green area between the without ADH and with ADH is all of ADH effect. It differs if we when we say ADH, we do not say, okay, we have one ADH and it will do the whole job. If we have 10 ADH, it's not the same as if we have 10 or 100 or 1,000. So it's about the concentration, okay? Same thing here. Only 20% of water is reaching the late distal tubule and collecting duct, and that 20% is what's under the ADH hormone control. So if we have ADH, it could go to as low as this, because you reabsorbed all of the water. Or if you do not have ADH, all of the 20% left from water will be excreted. I'm sorry guys if you because I'm recording all of this in one day, so it's quite hard. Okay. Now, these are some normal values that you should keep in mind. Nothing to be asked. This also. Okay, second lecture, and it's very important one. And this is, by the way, the last renal physiology lecture. The other guys, acid and bases, and Dr. Abdelrahman lecture about the blood. Okay. Control of osmolality and any concentration. We were talking about the reabsorption and all of that, all of the nephron. But now we want to talk when do we release ADH and how do we deal with the decrease and increase in osmolality. Now, we have these three systems that you should keep in mind, okay? We will talk about them one by one. First of all, osmoreceptor and ADH system. Let's go straight. Okay, before we talk about it, we want to say first, what does ADH do? ADH is not a steroid hormone, so it cannot pass the membrane. So its receptor is on the membrane outside, okay? It attaches to this receptor, and then it activates cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP activates protein kinase. Protein kinase phosphorylates the aquaporins, which are the channels for water. And these aquaporins are already there, but when they are phosphorylated, they are put into the membrane. And now water reabsorption happens. So the difference between ADH and aldosterone, it made the nucleus and the ribosomes and all of that to make new channels, okay, for sodium. But ADH, it just phosphorylates the already existing channels and it puts them into the membrane. Hope that makes sense. And as you can see, without ADH, it's very closed. And here, you see all of these pores. That's because of ADH. Now, how is ADH released? Inshallah, it's a very simple concept, but please focus with me. Two main guys that are taking part in this, which are hypothalamus and posterior pituitary gland. Let's look at the hypothalamus. In the hypothalamus, we have osmoreceptors. From their name, they sense the change in osmolarity. How? When you have high osmolarity outside here. You remember, guys, ACF and ICF? I doubt you do, but when you have high osmolarity outside the cell here, water is going out of the cell towards what? The high osmolarity, to balance it out. When water comes out, the neuron shrinks. When it shrinks, it feels, okay, no, something is wrong. And it sends this signal throughout this pathway towards what? The posterior pituitary gland. And the posterior pituitary gland releases ADH into the blood. Inshallah, it's a very clear concept. Something else that activates induces ADH release is baroreceptors in the right atrium let's make it blue. In the right atrium and in the carotid bodies. If you remember from CVB, these guys work and they sense if we have high or low pressure. So if we have low pressure of blood that's going into the right atrium and the baroreceptors, they will also they have some sensors, okay, in the hypothalamus, and it tells the posterior pituitary gland to release ADH into the blood. So these are the two cases, and we will discuss it more later. As we said, we are playing with the two things, osmolarity and blood volume. Okay? If the osmolarity increases, that means we want to release ADH. Why? Because that means we have less water. So we are trying to take water from urine and return it back to the blood. So as you see, it increases with the osmolarity, the ADH release. Now what about the blood volume? When the blood volume is decreasing, okay, ADH release is induced. Why? Because that means we have less water, we have low blood volume. So we want to take back the water to increase the blood volume. Okay? But something to note here is that the osmolarity reflex is instant. Once the osmolarity changes, right away, the ADH is induced. But the blood volume, it's not instant. It waits, as you can see, until it's less by 10% than normal. Why? The body is actually, subhanallah, it actually thinks in a different way than you might think. It looks at the low blood volume and say, okay, maybe we are here at 5%. It's not a dangerous amount. But what's dangerous is if I do release ADH and I retract the water, I will play with the osmolarity, okay? Because the blood volume is decreased, but the osmolarity is normal for now. So it doesn't feel like it should do anything. But once it exceeds this 10%, it will say, okay, no. This is very dangerous, okay? Now we are talking. I can endure the low osmolarity, but I cannot endure 10% of blood volume. So it starts increasing ADH. Okay? Hope that makes sense. Okay. So as you can see, when you increase ADH release, it will increase the urine osmolarity because you are retracting water back into the plasma, and it will decrease the urine excretion rate. Why? If the urine is you take all the water of it, it will become very solid, It will be all solute. So the excretion rate, each second, it's little, okay? Because, it's very slow. It doesn't have fluid. But the total excretion of electrolytes is normal. Why? Because the ADH is only playing at the water. So yes, it's not flowing a lot, but the electrolytes are still there. As we said, ADH synthesized in the hypothalamus, stored in the posterior pituitary gland. This is another name for it, neurohypophysis. And what stimulates releasing? Either the osmoreceptors that sense osmolarity, or the search receptors that sense the blood volume change. If you do not have ADH deficiency, this is very important. We call it diabetes insipidus. Not important. Okay, thirst. Thirst is exactly the same. The location is the hypothalamus, just like ADH. The stimulus is also increased osmolarity. So if you have more Na in the ECF, that means I have low water. Okay, so it start telling your body, okay, you're thirsty, go drink some water. The thirst threshold is 4 milliosmol. Why? Imagine if it was instantly activated. That means if you will drink water, each 2 minutes you will feel, oh, I'm thirsty, and you will go drink water, and I'm thirsty. It will be a torture. Subhanallah, we have the threshold. It's not activated unless we reach this threshold. 4 milliosmol difference. Salt hunger, also hypothalamus. What a beautiful place that is, huh? Okay, and it's stimulated by this. Not much explanation is needed, but try to memorize it, okay? Of course, if you have low sodium, your body will tell you, okay, please go eat some salt, okay? And if the blood volume is low, that means you have low blood volume. If you eat salt, you know that always water follows salt. So that will increase the osmolarity of the blood, hence taking water from the cells to the blood to increase, the blood volume. Thirst is developed immediately, where salt hunger is generated after several hours or days. I think that's self-explanatory. Now, edema. As you can see, this is the normal value. When you start retracting water, okay, until you reach about 7 liters, the blood volume is increasing. When you are increasing the extracellular fluid, the blood volume is increasing until about 7 liters. Then the vessels had reached its capacity. So you reach this plateau, and this extracellular fluid will be put into the interstitial fluid, leading to edema. How do we control blood volume? I'm sorry guys if this took a bit long, but these 2 lectures are quite long, about 40 slides. Okay guys, so for control of blood volume, we were talking about osmolarity before. Now we are talking about the blood volume. The main mechanism is pressure diuresis. It's basically when you have high pressure in vasa recta, in the kidney. Now, when you have this high pressure, the body senses, okay, there's something wrong. When we have high pressure, it usually means we have high volume. We need to excrete more. So what does it do? The more the pressure, the higher the urine volume will be. Okay? How does it work? It's basically when you have high pressure in vasa recta and high flow, you are washing out the solutes in the interstitium. When you wash out these solutes, now when you go to the, I think it's better if I go back to think it was 80 or something. Yeah, okay. If you wash out the solutes, you get rid of this hypertonic interstitium. And now, so it's here 300, right? It will see that it's 300, it will continue عادي. But when it sees it's 500, it pushes water out to balance out. But now that you get rid of this hypertonic interstitium, it will come and it will see it as 300 normally عادي. So it will continue 300 عادي. What does that mean? Water is not being pumped out here. Can you see that? Because the interstitium is not hypertonic anymore. I hope that makes sense. So this was a main mechanism. Now another mechanism is, of course, you know this from CVB. I don't think we should go through it, and inshallah Dr. Shams will not ask about it since it's more CVB. Now this slide, I know it looks frightening, but the way I like to deal with this is not to memorize all of this. Okay, I like to ask myself, I will tell you how we will do this. So look at let's start with talking about these guys. So we have natriuretic peptides. It does the exact opposite of the ADH. it won't, or let's say also the opposite of aldosterone. It's basically excreting more sodium and more water. So let's think about it here. If we were to excrete more water and more sodium in the afferent arteriole, will we do constriction or dilation? Well, you wanna excrete more, so you will need to increase GFR. So the afferent arteriole needs to be dilated. But in the afferent arteriole, no, I need more pressure in the capillary to increase GFR, so it will be constricted. You see? This is exactly what it does. So it increases the pressure, hence increases the GFR. Now, what else? Do we decrease or increase aldosterone? Of course we decrease aldosterone because we want to get rid of sodium. Do you remember that, guys? So aldosterone reabsorbs sodium. We will decrease aldosterone, hence more sodium excretion. And you will have this direct and indirect effect. No need to know that it's direct, this is indirect. For example, something like zona glomerulosa, it's a part in the adrenal gland. Have you taken the adrenal gland? No. So no need to dig deep into this, okay? And of course, it will have decreased in area absorption. Now, decreased in area subhanallah, absorption, and will you have decreased or increased in air absorption? Of course, you have decreased. You want to get rid of it. And inhibition of H2 absorption, of course, you want to get rid of water, so you will inhibit it. How does it inhibit water? By doing the exact opposite of ADH. One, it will decrease the ADH release, so we have less ADH. And the existing ADH, it will decrease its effect. Okay, so direct and indirect. Leading to these guys. Very easy. Just do not, you don't need to memorize it. Just ask yourself when you ask, okay, does the arterial natriuretic peptide increase, vasodilates or vasoconstricts the afferent arteriole? Just think yourself. I want to get rid of water. Of course, I will dilate the afferent arteriole, so more water will come in. Hope this helps, because for me, I do not memorize it صراحة. If you were to ask me just to recite this, I wouldn't be able to. This and this. Okay. Angiotensin, we said it does vasoconstriction, if you remember, in the first or second lecture. I'm not sure. So this vasoconstriction, it has its effect on the afferent arteriole, but it's mostly the efferent arteriole. Okay? What does that lead to? Of course, you will have less renal plasma flow. Doctor put B, but I will put P. Okay? And both are correct, of course. But what happens when you increase, this decreases GFR, right? Which is this one. Decreases GFR. But this increases GFR. So the GFR, let's say it will be unchanged for now. So it will remain the same. Okay? But the renal plasma flow has decreased. So when we say filtration fraction, which is how much have we filtered, which is GFR, over all of renal plasma flow, this is the same and this has decreased. So it will increase as a filtration fraction. If you increase the filtration fraction, you increase the hydrostatic pressure, not the hydrostatic, the colloid osmotic pressure of the peritubular cavity. What do I mean by that? Here, let's say we have less renal plasma flow. So instead of 600, 300 only got here. And the GFR is the same. So if we got rid of 120 milliliters here as filter, we'll also be 120 milliliters. What does that lead to? What's left here is 480 at normal conditions, right? But what's left here is 180. Can you see the difference? But the proteins are not filtered. So you'll have the same amount of protein with less blood going after in the peritubular cavity, after we are done with the glomerular cavity. Hence, more hydrostatic pressure, colloid osmotic pressure, and less hydrostatic pressure because less volume is going there. What does that lead to? More reabsorption, and that will lead to sodium reabsorption. Make sense? If you don't want to remember all of this, and it asks about angiotensin, just remember that angiotensin induces aldosterone release, and aldosterone reabsorbs sodium. Okay? It will be easy to remember the final effect. Also, here angiotensin decreases medullary blood flow. Why? Vasoconstriction, so more resistance, so less flow, and that will decrease the washout of solutes that we were talking about, the pressure diuresis thing, and that will lead to hypertonic interstitium and leading to reabsorbing water. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. This and this are not needed, and alhamdulillah, we're done with renal. Not renal, the kidneys at least. Now we have this big bear. We'll see. Okay, guys, so let's start with acid and bases. So acids are formed constantly in the body, and they are dangerous. Of course, acid and bases, but I'm talking more about acids because of this slide. They are very dangerous to the body. Why? Because they affect the body's pH, and all of this, all of these enzymes and everything that's going on in the body needs a certain pH to function well. If it's disrupted, it's very bad for the body. Okay? Now, how do we deal with these acids? If it was volatile, such as CO2, which means that we can inhale it and exhale it, then it will be going out through the lung. If it's non-volatile, it will be going out through the kidney, which is why we are discussing this in the renal block. But can we leave it in the blood until it goes to the kidney? That's dangerous. So we do something which is binding it with a buffer. What is a buffer? It's a pair of acid and base. This pair, so for example, if we say we have an H plus and OH, sorry guys, okay, and an OH minus. If we assume that this is a buffer, okay, this is an acid and this is a base. If you were to add an acid, another acid, H plus, it will be bound by this base, and it will lead to H2O, which is water. It's not harmful, okay? If we were to add a base, it will be bound by this, and it will also form H2O, and that's not dangerous for the pH. So this is how the buffers work. Of course, it's not H and OH, it's more than that, but let's just so you can understand. Now, here you just need to know what's an acid, what's a base, what's a buffer. An acid disassociates H plus, such as this, because it gives us H plus, and base binds with H plus because it binds with H plus and gives us an acid. Yeah, you can see this. And the buffer, we discussed it. Now, here, please memorize this as good as you memorize your name, because you will see it in mole, you will see it here. It's very important. Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. Now, from this curve, what do I need you to know? Actually, I don't think the curve is actually much important, but just know that the buffer, if you want the buffer to function well, it needs to be very close to its pK value, okay? And this pK value, for example, if a buffer is, pK value is 7, and the pH is also 7, then the buffer can function well, okay? If we say the buffer is 7 and the pH is 8, the pK of the buffer is 7 and the pH is 8, then it will not function as well. But where do we draw the line? When do we say that, okay, this is good and this is bad? At what number? Well, I'll tell you, it's 1.3 difference. This is what the curve is telling us. I will not go deep into the curve because it will be too much and it's not really needed. You just need to know this number. If you have a difference between pH and pK by 1.3 or more, then it's not a good buffer. If it's less, it can work. And the closer, the better. Okay? Okay. For example, look at this. Here, the pK value of this buffer is 3.9. Is it a good buffer in the human body? Well, you will look at the human body and tell me what pH is it. Let's assume it's 7 just to make it easy. The difference between the pK and the pH is 3, which means it's not a good buffer because we said 1.3 is our maximum. Look at this one, 9.4. Difference between 7 and 9.4, about 2.4. Is it good? No, it exceeds the 1.3 limit. But look at this buffer, the phosphate buffer. It's 6.8. It means it's 0.2 difference between the pK and the pH of the body. Hence, it's a very good buffer. But can we say that though? Well, here's how you can judge a good buffer or not. First of all, what we did was amazing. We looked at the pH and pK difference. When you find that the difference is too much, we say it's not a good buffer right away. But when we find it that the difference is good, we don't say right away, okay, this is a good buffer, because there is another criteria that this buffer needs to pass, which is the concentration of this buffer. If we have a lot of this buffer, then it's a good, and the pH-pK difference. And the pH-pK difference is, is less than 1.3, then it's a good buffer. If the pH-pK difference is less than 1.3, but we have like 2 molecules of it, what will it do? Buffer 2H plus? It's not a good buffer. What can I do with that? Okay, for examples of biological buffers, as we said, phosphate buffer, and it has high concentration. So yes, it's a good buffer. Why? This is 6.8. Okay? Now, let's look at bicarbonate. And bicarbonate will surprise you, because we've all been taught that bicarbonate is the best buffer, and wow, be like bicarbonate. But when you look at it, the extracellular pH is 7.4. This is the actual number, okay? And the pK is 6.1. You will notice the difference is exactly 1.3, which means it's actually not that good of a buffer. But why do we say it's very important? Well, this law that, okay, pH-pK difference only works under one condition, and that this reaction is happening in a closed system. But this is not actually happening. Why? Because CO2 is being always exhaled from the body. So it doesn't actually apply here. Since it's happening in an open system, it can actually buffer well, even though the pH difference is not that well. And we have proteins. They are also good buffers. Now for proteins, please remember these 3. I think we might be asked about it, because not all proteins are good buffers in the body, but these 2 proteins are, and this group, which is found in all proteins, is good. Okay, when I say protein, I mean the functional group of the protein, the R group, if you studied biochemistry. So this is found in all proteins, so they can all act as buffers. But the functional group of cysteine and histidine are the only 2 functional groups that can buffer. Okay, just note, please. Okay, these are numbers that you should also memorize. The concentration and the normal pH. I think they are pretty easy to find. Okay, guys. So this is a very important graph. Okay, basically, look at this equation. How many variables do we have? This guy, and this guy, and this guy. Okay, because this is a constant. We have 3 variables. We will play with them a little bit and see how the graph gives. How is the graph? First of all, let's cancel these guys out. Let's focus on the middle one. Okay? Can you see this? And for the sake of this, we will make the CO2 constant. So the partial pressure is always 40. Can you see? This line is always 40. So we only change if we made this constant. As I said in one of the previous lectures, when you have 2 variables, and the rest is constant, if you find one of them, you can find the other right away. So we will make the PCO2 40, and it's constant. And we will play now with the HCO3, which is the bicarbonate concentration. So when we have 24 or 25 bicarbonate, you will get the pH of what? 7.4. When you decrease the bicarbonate, you will get pH of 7.2. When you increase the bicarbonate, you will get what? a pH of 7.6, and you draw this line. Now you do it again, and again, and again, okay, with different CO2 partial pressure. It's constant, but you changed it from one experiment to the other, and you will get this graph. Why is it important? You will see later why this is like one of the most important things. If I were to choose one concept that you should know before you go to the exam, I will choose this, okay? Because I feel like we'll be asking a lot about it. And I will discuss with you guys why is it important later. Now, okay, increases in BCO2 in a solution containing only bicarbonate. Now, let's see what happens when we increase CO2 in a solution. If we assume that we have no other buffers other than the bicarbonate buffer. So now we increase CO2, okay? When you increase CO2, the reaction will go this way. Hence, more HCO3 and more H+. But what actually happens? Well, if we double, let's look at this equation to understand. If we double the concentration of CO2, you need to double the concentration above to reach the equilibrium. Does that make sense? I hope it does. But in this case, we actually have around 0.0000001 molecules of H. This is the concentration of H+. Can you imagine how little is that? While we have, 0.24 HCO3. This is the concentration of HCO3 and the concentration of H+. So now that you increased CO2, doubled it. So you added a lot of CO2, okay? What will happen? This H+, only one molecule of CO2 will go there and increase H+ and increase HCO3. Once H+ is increased, since it's only this small amount, it will just become like this. But the concentration already doubled. Can you see? The difference is very small, but the concentration already doubled. Can you see that? While this, like one extra molecule of this will not do anything. So what happens when we add CO2, in a closed, when we add CO2 in a compartment, when this is the only buffer that we have, H+ will directly increase and it will stop the reaction right away, even if we double the CO2. And do you know what double CO2 means? Like it's a large amount of CO2. But this is not what actually happens. This is the important part. Okay? Here. Okay? I will come back to the previous slide. Now, guys, let's just move this out of the way. No need, it's just K here. This is what's actually happening. We have other buffers here in this system. And this is what's happening in our body. So now the CO2 increased. What happens normally, as we said, if we do not have other buffers, if we stop it at here, this increases and stops the reaction. But now that we have other buffer, this H+ will increase and then it will be bound by this buffer, giving us this. So no, we didn't change much because you doubled this, but this didn't change, and the change in this is very minimal. So what will happen? The next molecule goes, and H+ increases, but it's bound by this buffer, and more, and more, and more, and more. And it will just keep going until there is a big difference in HCO3. Okay? So actually in our body, the more CO2 that we produce, the more bicarbonate that we get. There, it wasn't like that because H+ will increase and stop the reaction right away. I hope that makes sense. Now, okay guys, so I will explain this first and then I will go to the other. Now we just said that, this is what happens when you do not have any buffers other than bicarbonate, and here when you have other buffers other than bicarbonate. So how will that look in this graph? What's this graph talking about? I will show you. So now we have this, which we call an isobar. Okay, what's an isobar? Do you guys remember the graph that I emphasized here? This is what we call an isobar. Iso means same. Bar is, you remember barometric pressure, something like this. Comes from pressure. So it's a line where we have the same pressure of CO2. Okay? So here we have isobar 40. We drew I forgot the diagram, yeah. When the PCO2 is 40, and when it's 60, and when it's 80, and when it's 120, and when it's 30, and when it's 20, all of that. You will see if we have no other buffers, when you increase CO2, very high increase, like from 40 to 60 to 80 to 120, we will go along this buffer line, by the way. We call this a buffer line. Here, our buffer line is 0. Why? Because we have no buffers other than bicarbonate. So you will go with it, and you find out that bicarbonate does not increase. This is exactly what we were talking about. But what actually happens is this. If we are normal, and you increase CO2, you start from this 40, and you increase CO2, then bicarbonate increases. And you can see, okay, and you can see that it noticeably increases, okay? If we have less buffers, such as anemia, you have less hemoglobin, you see, it increases, but not much. If you have polycythemia, which is the opposite of anemia, it increases much more, okay? Hope that makes sense. These are the keynotes for the first lecture. We talked about all of this, PHBK different, how do we evaluate if the buffer is good or not, these two main points. And we talked also about the properties. Why is the CO2 and bicarbonate a good buffer system? First of all, it's happening in an open system. Second of all, it can, that's something that I didn't explain. Sorry. When we go back here. Okay. Someone might think, okay, so we increase CO2 and we don't have other buffers other than bicarbonate. Why doesn't bicarbonate binds H plus itself? Well, that cannot happen because it's the disturbance. So it's as if you were asking a thief to catch that murderer, It's not happening because it's the disturbance. It came from the source itself. So it cannot buffer during problems with respiratory changes. Also here, last thing is, as we said, if we have only bicarbonate, increase of CO2 does not increase much bicarbonate, but since we have other buffers, it increases a lot. Okay. Now we produce a lot of CO2 and it's getting out by lungs, this. All of this, Okay, so this is where the second lecture begins. Here you can see that during metabolism, when you metabolize carbohydrate or fat, you do not produce neither H or OH. But amino acids produce H or OH. Why? Because of the functional groups, the R groups of them. Okay, so who produces H plus? Sulfur-containing amino acids and cationic amino acids. Cationic means positive. And positive in amino acids, I know it might sound confusing, is the basic amino acids that you guys know from MOL, okay? I know you shouldn't basic be negative or whatever. Amino acids work different, okay? Just memorize it. Now, anionic amino acids, which means negative, so these are your acidic amino acids, are producing OH, because they are anionic. And cationic, of course, are producing H+. Also, organic acids are producing OH. Just know that which of these produces which. Okay, so you will look at the food that we are eating and you want to say, okay, how much H plus is being produced and how much OH is being produced. If they are equal, then we're okay, because H plus will bind with OH, give us water, and nothing will happen. But if one is more than the other, then it's a problem. You look at the diet, for example, of North America. I think this is North America, but I don't know. Maybe this is how they write North in German. Dr. Shams was there for a long time. I don't know. Anyways, so you see that you are eating or consuming 210 millimoles of H plus daily if you are on that diet. But you are only taking 130 millimoles of OH. So you have 80 millimoles of H plus that needs to be excreted. Who will do that? The kidney, of course. You cannot breathe H plus. Okay. This slide I personally hate, by the way. But inshallah, we can do this. Okay, so let's start. You have bicarbonate coming from the blood. Okay, this is what's happening in the kidney. This bicarbonate binds with H plus and it goes and it becomes CO2. We discussed similar things in, I forgot the name of the lecture, but you guys know what I mean. CO2 is permeable to the membrane, so it goes into the cell. Now it works with the, it binds with H2O and give us HCO3 and all of that. And that leads to reabsorption of CO3. Okay? Now we are talking about H+. How will it be secreted? Now it goes out again. But this time, instead of binding with HCO3, it does something other than that. Because if it binds with HCO3, nothing happened. Bicarbonate gives us CO2 and it goes into the cell. So we did nothing. But when you have H+ binding with this other buffer, okay, which is the phosphate buffer, you will have this. This has a negative charge. It cannot go into the membrane, so it will be excreted. Beautiful, okay? Now, other thing that Now, this buffer can buffer 40 millimoles of H+ daily. But that's not enough, because if you remember, we said how much do we need to get rid of? 80. How do we buffer the rest? Well, this is our second buffer that's helping us with that. Glutamine, which is an amino acid, gets broken down to these guys. Okay, these two things. Let's stick with our, I forgot the name of this molecule, so guys, please forgive me. But okay, please. Sorry. This molecule is positive, so it cannot run through the membrane right away. So it disassociates first to this guy, which is permeable to the membrane because it has no charge. And it also gives us this guy, okay? This H+ that we want to excrete from the start has its own transporter, so it can go out. When it goes out, it returns back to NH4+, the one that we started with. This buffer can excrete 40 millimoles a day, and that's 80. What if we have more than 80? This buffer has a capacity of 500 millimoles a day. So I would love to give him a round of applause because that's crazy stuff. Okay, now we have glutamine gave us this, okay? What else did it give us? Alpha ketoglutarate. Alpha ketoglutarate with H+ binds H+ to become glucose and it goes into the cell. But that H+ came from where? Okay, it didn't come here like this. It actually came from this reaction that we all know and we have seen multiple times. This CO2 was produced in the cell. What I want to say is for each H+, which is this guy, 2 H+ have been secreted because of the breaking down of glutamine, right? With each H+ that's being brought out, one HCO3 is going into the blood. Okay, this is a very important relation that you should remember. Whether it was from this whole thing or from this, always when you are excreting one H+, you are returning one bicarbonate to the blood. I hope that makes sense. Okay, the blood buffers, as you can see, we discussed them: bicarbonate, hemoglobin, plasma proteins. Why is it not phosphate? Because we have low concentration in extracellular fluid. Now gets the fun part. Parameters for analyzing acid and base status. Now, to say, so a patient comes to you and you want to know, does he have acidosis, alkalosis? Is he normal? Is a normal patient? And if he has acidosis, is it caused by respiratory problem? So maybe, for example, he has emphysema and he cannot exhale CO2 well? Or is it a problem maybe in his metabolic pathways that's producing more H plus than needed? So all of this, to figure it out, you have to do some tests. And these are the tests that you need. 3 tests. And please try to organize it in your mind, and inshallah it will be very easy. First of all, you need to have his pH, his blood pH. Okay? Because this tells us, is it acidosis, is it alkalosis, is it normal? Now, if it's alkalosis or acidosis, we want to know, is it caused by a respiratory problem or a non-respiratory problem? How will we do that? We need one parameter for respiratory and one parameter for non-respiratory. Okay? Now, the parameter for respiratory is the partial pressure of CO2, because it's all affected by respiratory problems. And the non-respiratory tests are these 3. I want you guys to focus with these 2. Now, this test, actual bicarbonate, is not important. And sorry, this is a bad word. It's not important, but it doesn't actually tell you whether it was respiratory or metabolic. Why? Because we discussed that when you increase the CO2, so that's a respiratory problem, you get an increase in HCO3. At the same time, we saw here that when you have a problem with H+, which is a metabolic pathway in the kidneys, you also increase the HCO3 in the plasma. So it can be affected by both. So it doesn't tell us anything. But we'll discuss how can we understand from it the states of the patient. Now, let's talk about buffer bases and base excess. What's buffer bases? Let's take this reaction as our standard reaction, okay? And buffer bases is basically how much bicarbonate we have and how much other buffers we have. Because bicarbonate is a buffer at the end of the day. So buffer bases is basically how much bases that are buffering do we have in our body. So it's bicarbonate plus the other buffers in the body. What's base excess? Base excess is basically you take this buffer base, okay, and you see the buffer base that you see the buffer base for the patient. For example, if it's 50, it's normally 48, so you decrease it from 48. And if it's positive or negative, it has its own meanings, and we will talk a lot about that, okay? These are just a brief summary for what are these tests. This slide, you should, knows this, I think. Just know this range also, it's important. And that's pretty much it. I wouldn't say you should know anything more. Now, when we say acidosis and alkalosis, what's acidosis? It's when you have lower pH than normal, because you have higher concentration of H+. And what's alkalosis? It's when you have pH higher than normal. As simple as that. Now, acidosis, as we said, or alkalosis can be caused by either respiratory or non-respiratory. Okay? Now, let's look at respiratory acidosis and what happens in respiratory acidosis. Now, what's the main disturbance in respiratory acidosis? More CO2 is accumulating, right? We discussed that when you have a lot of CO2 accumulating, what will happen to the HCO3, the bicarbonate? It also increases. At the same time, this H+ is increasing. But why is it increasing so little? Because we have other buffers there that are buffering the H+, okay? So it doesn't increase as much. Does that make sense? Inshallah it does. Okay. Now, look, this is exactly what's written here. So you have an increase in PCO2. You have also, of course, a decrease in pH. Why? Because you have an increase in H+, even if it was a little increase. And you have increase in CO2. And, yeah. The thing is, why do we say that buffer base and buffer excess are not affected by respiratory pathways? Here's the thing. Now, this decreased because it binds with H+ to buffer it, right? And this increased. Do you guys remember what was the buffer base أصلا? Well, it was HCO3 plus other bases. This decreased and this increased. So the overall change is what? This. How do you compensate for that? Well, look at the equation and please take the green off for now. This is what happened right at the start. We had a lot of CO2 increase. We had so little HCO3 increase and hence a pH decrease. Okay? Now, to balance this out, we could decrease CO2. Okay? To return back to normal. But that's not an option. Why is it not? Because this is the disturbance. We have more CO2. Can you tell the emphysema patient to, bro, just breathe? You cannot do that, okay? So how will your body compensate for it? The body compensates by doing this. It increases HCO3 by metabolic pathways. How does it do it? You remember, guys, in the kidney, when it excreted H plus and got bicarbonate into the blood? Exactly, this is what's happening here. When this increases, and now these guys are almost equal, you have what? An increase in pH after that decrease, and it almost goes back to normal. Almost. Okay? And you will have the buffer bases is higher than normal. Why? Because, let's go back again for this. The buffer bases will be higher than normal because for this it was 0, right? But then you increased HCO3 even more. So it will be more than 0. Okay? The buffer so it will be higher than normal, and for buffer excess it will be sorry, it's not 0. Sorry guys, here, yeah. So since we're talking about buffer bases, we said that this will be normal, not 0, yani at the normal level. Now when we increase this more, it will be more than normal. And for base excess, of course it will be positive. Why? Because as we said, if this is more than normal, so for example, the normal is 48, right? And this is more than normal, so it's 50. Base excess is basically the difference between them, and that will lead to a positive base excess. This compensation we call metabolic alkalosis. So from now on, if you want to compensate for something, just do the complete opposite. Respiratory acidosis is compensated by metabolic alkalosis, and metabolic acidosis is being compensated by respiratory alkalosis. Metabolic alkalosis is being compensated by respiratory acidosis. Always just like reverse the whole thing if you were to be asked about it. Now, if you want to see that on the diagram, our beautiful diagram that you will be asked about in the final, do not forget it. At first, the patient had an increase in CO2, right? This is the first problem, the respiratory acidosis. What will happen? He will go like this, right? But then the body compensated by increasing the HCO3 like this. You always like go along the line that you are on. And you can see that this point and this point, can you see the pH difference? Here it was 7.2 and here it was 7.3. So we compensated by increasing the pH, which is this line alone, it's metabolic alkalosis. This line alone is respiratory acidosis. Both together we call it partially compensated respiratory acidosis, because the main disturbance, the respiratory acidosis, has been partially compensated. Why do we not say fully? Because the normal is 7.4. Is that 7.4? I don't think so. It's about 7.3. Now for metabolic acidosis. Okay? Metabolic acidosis means that the problem is coming from the H plus itself. It's not the CO2. So when you increase the H plus, some of it will bind here, some of it will bind here, and both these guys will be what? Lower than normal. Now what about CO2? It will not be affected. Why? Although more CO2 will be formed by this reaction, but the lungs are keeping it constant. Okay? The patient might just have some hyperventilation or something too. Okay. Now, what's happening here? Of course, since you increase the H plus, you decrease the pH, and that will lead to all of these. Now, what happens to the base, buffer base and base excess? Let's see. So you have a decrease in both HCO3 and B minus. So when you have a decrease in bicarbonate and a decrease in B minus, and the buffer base is basically adding both. So that means it will be lower than normal. If it's lower than normal, the base excess will be negative. Okay, because as we said, the normal is 48. If it's lower than normal, it's 45. And now you subtract it, it will give you negative number, whatever it was. And the PaCO2, it will be normal, as we said, because CO2 does not change because the lungs keeps it constant. Okay, so this is what happens. Let's take the green for now and see what's the problem. Less HCO3. Normal CO2, as we said, doesn't change. Causes lower pH than normal. How do we compensate for that? Okay, we could, as we said, do this. But that's not an option because the body, as we said, does not treat the disturbance. This is our jobs. If it does, we will be at home now, okay? So what it does is it compensates by doing the decreasing CO2 to return the whole thing to normal, okay? And as we said, what is this? Metabolic acidosis. So how are we treating it, okay? By respiratory alkalosis. Just reverse the whole thing. Now, if we were to put it in the graph, you have what? Metabolic acidosis. Metabolic acidosis first, okay? Because you had more H plus and less HCO3. This is the main disturbance. But as PCO2 changing, no, we are still in the P40 thing. But after that, the PCO2 changes because the lungs are adapting. It's doing a respiratory alkalosis. And you are moving along the buffer line until you reach this, for example, where you decreased CO2. And now you can see that before it was 7.2, now it's 7.3, so we are closer to normal, and this is partially compensated metabolic acidosis. Now, it's the same for alkalosis. So if we were to look at this point and look at number one, what's happening? Is the BCO2 changing? This is the first thing that you need to look. No, that means it's a metabolic problem. Okay? Now, are we going towards alkalosis or acidosis? No, alkalosis, because we are high pH. So that means that this is metabolic alkalosis. Okay? So I will not write that. It's metabolic alkalosis. How will that be compensated? As we said, reverse the whole thing. Respiratory acidosis. And this is exactly what's happening here. Between this and this, we have less pH here, so it's acidosis, and it's respiratory because PCO2 changed. And this is the same, but it was respiratory alkalosis, and then it became metabolic acidosis. Okay, hope that helps. This is it's not saying much. You can interpret that with your knowledge now. Okay, now something to note here. When you look at this point and this point, and you don't have any lines, you need to figure it out yourself, okay? You will say, okay, so I have two ways to reach this point. Either this way or this way, okay? And let's take each way and analyze it, okay? So here, what's happening here? The CO2 is changing, right? So it's a respiratory problem. And we are going towards acidosis. So this is respiratory acidosis. Now, if we are here at respiratory acidosis, what's the compensation? Of course, it will be metabolic alkalosis. Okay, so this is an option. The other option is that we had a metabolic alkalosis and we compensated by respiratory acidosis. But that's not an option here. Do you know why, guys? That's because the body never overcompensates. This is all something that you should keep in mind. Because, let's say, so here we had what? Alkalosis, right? And then the body went all the way the other way and it's now actually acidosis. Oh, so now we have another problem. Will it go all the way back to alkalosis and then acidosis and then alkalosis and then acidosis? You see, subhanallah, we have no, we never overcompensate. We cannot cross the normal line. So if we are crossing the normal line, we can ditch this theory and we can only take this. But look at this point now. We have this option and this option. You can figure it out yourself with them. And both options are valid. Do you know what that is? We call it a combined respiratory and metabolic acidosis. If you have two options and both are possible, that means they are working together. Can you imagine? So you have a combined respiratory and metabolic acidosis. And yeah, this is the diagram that you will find in the exam, inshallah. He will probably tell you, مثلا, what's this point? What's this point? What's this point? You can play with it as you want. This is this you can interpret it yourself. I do not want you guys to memorize between this and this and this and this. If for any reason he gets a question saying what's the region between that and this, please just draw the diagram and figure it out. Or you can memorize it if you want, but I do not like that. Now, how to deal with it as numbers? We are not talking here about the diagram anymore, because when someone comes in the clinic, you will not have the diagram. Okay? So, as we said, 3 measurements that we should know. Okay? Now, what I want you guys to know is how to deal with these measurements. Please, please, please focus with me in this. First of all, you always look at the pH. This pH, is it acidosis, alkalosis, or normal? Acidosis. Okay? Second thing, you look at the PCO2. You look at it and it's higher than normal. That means it's a respiratory acidosis. Okay? Is that actually what the pH is telling us? Yes. And always please remember, the pH is the only one that's always telling the truth. The others could lie to you. Okay? And we'll see. Now, does it match the pH? Yes, it does. Because we actually have acidosis. That means that this is the disturbance. This is the problem that we want to fix. Now you look at the base axis. It will be normal. When it's normal, it means that no action has been taken. And that means that... Oh, sorry. What's that? Okay. And that means that we are not yet to compensate for it. Okay? So this is non-compensated respiratory acidosis. Now look at this one. Same thing, acidosis, respiratory acidosis. Does it match? Yes, it does. So this is the disturbance. You look here and it's positive. Do you remember what positive means? It means that it was metabolic alkalosis. Okay? You can refer back to the previous slides to confirm that. So it's metabolic alkalosis. So please remember that positive means alkalosis. And does that match the Does that match the pH? No, it doesn't, because the pH is telling us acidosis, but this is alkalosis. That means it's the compensation. So this is partially compensated respiratory acidosis. You will look at this, acidosis, acidosis, acidosis. All of them are matching, which means that this is a combined respiratory and metabolic acidosis. Okay? Now look at this. Acidosis. This is alkalosis, right? Because it's less than normal. And what does that tell you? Does it match? No. So you would say, okay, this is a compensation. But then you go to the metabolic alkalosis, to the metabolic pathway, and you find it's a metabolic alkalosis also, because it's positive. How? Both are alkalosis, but this is acidosis. Who did we say is always telling the truth? pH. So you believe pH. And you say, okay, so the pH is 7.2, so this is acidosis. These guys are lying to me. That means there has been a problem in the lab. You return back the sample and tell them, please give me another test. Okay, it cannot be true. Now look at this one, acidosis. And you will look at this, okay, respiratory alkalosis. Could be the compensation, could be not. Who knows? But after you look here and you find that, okay, metabolic acidosis, does it match? Yes, it does. So this is the disturbance and this is the compensation. And this is partially compensated metabolic acidosis. I hope this makes sense, because you will have a question about this 100%, if it's not even more. Why am I saying you? We will, okay? Okay. Anion gap. You need just to know how to calculate it. You remember when I said cations are positive? So these are positive ions. These are the cations. Anion gap is the gap between the cations and the anions. These guys, the negative molecules. Now in the body, when you look at the concentration, this and this, all of these guys, sorry, not this way. Positive ions and negative ions are equal. But what is this gap? Some of these anions we cannot really measure well. Okay? If we cannot measure it well, it gives us this hypothetical gap. And we calculate it by doing this, adding the positive ions, mostly sodium and potassium, no need for the others because their concentration is very little, and we subtract them from the negative ions, which are mostly chloride and bicarbonate. Okay, just memorize the equation. Now we can do it without K, but then we will here we have a normal anion gap. Our range is 14 to 18. So now here, we can do it without the K, but then there is a consequence, which is, you see the normal ion gap, it decreases. It becomes 10 to 14, because we took the 4, because if you remember, the potassium concentration is 4. So instead of it being 14 to 18, we say it's what? 10 to 14. And the ion gap will be in that range. Okay, now why is that important? When you have acidosis, this anion gap cannot be used unless you have a metabolic acidosis. Respiratory problems? No. Metabolic alkalosis? No. You only use it in metabolic acidosis to help you to figure out what the problem is. Now, some problems, these guys, are they usually have high anion gap. Why? Because they have normal chloride, but low HCO3, which is bicarbonate. And if you go up here and you have normal, but less of this. So all of this together is less. And these guys are the same. So for example, for 50, these guys are less, so the anion gap will be high. Okay? Now, you could also have some problems where they have normal anion gap. And that's when we have high chloride and still low bicarbonate. What changed? The high chloride. It compensated for the loss of bicarbonate. These are the problems that are associated with the high anion gap, and these are the problems that are associated with normal anion gap. If I were to choose things to memorize, I would choose these guys. And this area. Okay? Of course, chronic renal failure. So kidney problems have high anion gap. Just remember that. Okay. Now you get the patient, and the body is not compensating well. So you want to infuse him with something to balance it out. So he has metabolic acidosis. You want to infuse him with a base, right? How do we calculate that? This is the equation. Okay? And it's the same for an acid, for metabolic alkalosis when you want to infuse an acid. But because acids are more dangerous, you will infuse, you will replace that 0.3 here by 0.2 here. It's pure memorization, nothing to explain. And alhamdulillah, we are done with Dr. Shams's lectures. Now, last lecture, and it's pretty easy, inshallah. And I will also tell you the most important questions that comes from this lecture. Now, you know the urinary bladder. It's not new to you. And you know the structure, because that's an anatomy objective. But what's important here is, please, in this slide, know the capacity. I know that we have physiological and anatomical capacity. What's a physiological capacity? It's the capacity where your brain, it tells you, okay, if you don't go to the bathroom, I am exploding, okay? the bladder will explode. But that's not actually true, because the anatomical capacity, please do not try to reach it, okay? under normal physiological conditions you should not reach it أصلا. The anatomical capacity, if we get like a cadaver and we infuse its bladder with water, it can take it until I think 1 liters. Okay, so this is the difference. Now, the micturition reflex is basically the reflex that the body makes. I will explain it more later, but just know for now that we are filling the bladder and then we are doing the reflex to urinate. Now, what is this reflex about? You know that we have three parts that are controlling the urination. A detrusor muscle that controls the bladder itself, internal sphincter that's involuntary controlled, and an external sphincter that's voluntary controlled by the somatic nerves. Okay, so what's the innervation here, and what does each of these guys do? You will see that we have from the pelvic splanchnic nerves, which are parasympathetic nerves, they control the involuntary guys, which are these two. Okay, like this and this. They control both. What does parasympathetic do? It allows urination. So it will constrict the detrusor muscle, the bladder, constriction, to push the urine out, and it will relax the sphincter, the internal sphincter, to allow the urine to pass. Make sense? Makes sense. Now, what about the sacral splanchnic nerve, which are sacral splanchnic nerves, which are coming from the sympathetic, which are sympathetic nerves. Okay, these guys are inhibiting the urination, so they will relax the bladder and constrict the sphincter to close it, so no urine will come out. Now, what about the external sphincter? It will be controlled by the pudendal nerve, okay, which is somatic nerve. Now, cytometrogram. Cytometrogram is basically this device where they infuse the bladder with water and they measure the pressure and see the change in pressure with the volume. How does it change? As you can see here, we have this vesical volume, the volume for the bladder, and it's increasing. They are infusing, as you can see here, they have like this thing, I forgot its name, but they open a little bit, add 50 milliliters of urine here and close it, and then measure, and then another 50 and close it and measure, and so on. Now, you see at the first 50 milliliters, the pressure is increasing. You see? Pressure is increasing. And this phase, we call it 1A. Now, after that, second 50, third 50, fourth 50, you see we have what we might call a plateau, which is 1B. Okay? And this is due to Laplace law. I will discuss it later. Okay? But just know that the pressure does not increase in this second phase. And then at around 400 milliliters, you feel the fullness and the bladder starts constricting, involuntary, okay? But because you have the external urethral sphincter that you voluntarily control, you do not start urinating, actually. Okay? Now, what should you know here? It's very, very, very important to note this. And this is a question that Dr. Abdelrahman always asks. When do you feel the first urge to urinate? And it's at 150 milliliters. The first signal that gets to the brain that, okay, I could urinate now, is at 150 milliliters. And when do you reach the sensation of fullness, like, okay, I can't take it anymore? At 400 milliliters. Okay, please remember these two values and what they are referring to. And yeah, here we have some, not very important, I would say, to be honest. Laplace's law. Why do we not have an increase in pressure here? Well, according to Laplace's law, that the pressure is equal to the tension divided by the radius. When you are increasing the volume, you are increasing the tension, because more water or more urine is being has tension with the the surface of the bladder. Okay, but at the same time you're increasing the radius, because the bladder is being stretched. So if you increase this and you increase this, what would that lead to? The same pressure. So it maintains the same pressure because of Laplace's law. Okay. Now, the micturition reflex. We start, how does it happen? Well, you have sensory fibers in the bladder that sense that something is wrong and that the urine is being filling the bladder. So it goes to the spinal cord. It goes to the spinal cord and it tells it, okay, we need to urinate. The spinal cord takes this thing and it goes two ways. One way, it goes up through the brain. And that doesn't happen unless someone is like of a reasonable age. So maybe 3 years, 4 years. When they start, I think it's about 4 to 5 years. Other than that, this way that's going to the brain is not happening. Okay, they just play with the spinal cord only. So now we reach the spinal cord. The spinal cord goes to the parasympathetic pathway and tells it to what? Start urinating. If you do not have this pathway that's going up to the brain, telling it, okay, where in the brain, by the way? It's the pons. So it goes to the urinating center, the micturition center in the pons and telling it, okay, we might need to urinate. If it tells it, okay, this is where you can control. You feel, okay, I might need to urinate, and you can control whether or not you want to, okay? But in babies, for example, they do not have this pathway. So what happens is this. It goes and it comes and they start urinating. Okay? This is the voluntary part of the containing thing. And as we said, it's in the bones, in the micturition center. And these two parts are very important. And also the tracts that they follow. Please remember them. So urination can be prompted by fear. We all know that. Someone beat themselves, as they say, okay? And it's inhibited by the knowledge that it's inappropriate for urination. So, for example, if you don't want to urinate, if you are in the middle of a class, for example, you cannot just, okay? And this is why it's inhibited then. And please remember the tracts also. Dr. Abdelrahman, I think he mentioned them. Just, I don't think he will ask about it, but, keep it in mind. Okay, now what are the abnormalities that we might face in micturition? First of all, if we do not have a sensory nerve, what will that happen? This first part is not happening. So a person can urinate they can urinate when they want to, okay? But they do not feel like the bladder is being filled. And that could lead to serious problems if the person forgets to urinate. Okay, the bladder will be filled so much and they are feeling nothing. Now for the uroflowmetry, it's basically a device where it measures the flow rate of the person that's urinating. How much is the flow of the urine, okay? And I would say remember the values in case he asks about it, but just know them for the sake of it. Now, okay, another problem that might happen is what if we cut the spinal segment from here? You remember, guys, we had the sensory fibers going to the spinal cord, and then the spinal cord is sending it back to the bladder. And another pathway is going up towards the brain. If it's cut here, this will happen. But the part of going to the brain is not happening. It's cut. So they will be just like babies, okay? They can be themselves. If someone had an injury and it cut the spinal cord from this part. So it's functioning, but it's not connected to the upper part of the higher control, I would say. Okay, other abnormalities in micturition. Stress incontinence. This happens when the sphincter has been damaged, such as with pregnant women when they give birth. This could happen to them, and they cannot hold the urine then because the sphincters have been damaged. Acute retention of urine and chronic static obstruction. The main difference is that acute retention of urine is very related to elderly men. It's both happening to the prostatic enlargement, but acute retention means that the prostatic enlargement has gone too far to the point where they really cannot cannot be, then you could maybe do a paracentesis or something. But chronic prostatic obstruction, it's just this gradually increasing in size prostata that's constricting the ureter. So the main point is, remember that this is more related to the acute retention of urine. The acute retention of urine is more related to elderly men, because he might, get it and get both in the choices. I think I have seen it in the past exams. Now, also another problem that might face people is overactive bladder syndrome. It's basically that the bladder cannot contain itself. Once it gets the first urge, for example, 150 or 200 milliliters, it starts right away. Okay? And the question has been asked about this. In these patients, which of these phases are decreased? And of course, it's this phase, the filling phase. Because once you get here, you start this phase right away. Okay? Let's do it in blue. Once you get right around here or here, you start this phase. So all of the phases will work, except for the filling phase, this one. Which is IB, by the way, in the cystometry. Not I, 1B. Please remember it. Okay, micturition syncope. It's basically when someone, you know that parasympathetic is what enhances or stimulates urination, parasympathetic innervation. And who is also a parasympathetic nerve? Vagus. So when there is too much parasympathetic control happening, vagus slows down the heart, and that might lead to a syncope, which is passing out, someone passing out while urinating. And yeah, this is it. Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. I don't know how much that took me, but believe me, it took me a lot. This was my first session, so please, if you like this, or if you have any comments, if you didn't like the session, please tell me what can I improve. And thank you very much, guys. I actually tried my best, so thank you for being here. And please, keep me in your prayers if you found this helpful. Good luck in the exam, guys, and see you inshallah.